preciousness. He draws from Western philosophy. You will see an excerpt from Plato's Phaedrus, which he includes in the middle of the book, to Eastern philosophy, as he frequently references the Bhagavad Gita. He weaves together a bit of everything. And the terminology he uses, it is his own creation, his own invention, essentially a modern attire for ideas that have always been discussed. It is interesting for us to reflect on this. You will see, for example, that throughout history, the Greeks, and later the Romans as well, were great admirers of the entire Egyptian tradition. They learned much of what they knew, if not everything, from the Egyptian tradition, which at that time still had many living elements. However, the Greeks took Egyptian concepts and gave them a form that the Greeks themselves could understand. For example, when they set out to represent the goddess of justice, they did not use Maat. Instead, they used Athena, which was a veil more suitable for a Greek to comprehend. In other words, they updated the symbols to make them easier to understand within their own civilization. Notice how curious this is, because nowadays we are great inventors of everything imaginable. From technology to pure science itself, we are brilliant. We can calculate the distance between two galaxies with remarkable precision, and we are able to build a particle accelerator that simulates the initial moments of the universe's manifestation. What does this mean? What we accomplish is truly remarkable. However, when we consider the human aspect, we have not been able to create our own symbols. Have you ever noticed this? When we want to talk about justice, those in the field of law know that they have to use the goddess Themis, the one with a blindfold over her eyes and a scale in her hand. Well, let's be honest. Themis is Greco-Roman. Haven't we created a modern representation for justice? No, we have not. So, we have to borrow symbols from the past. Just yesterday, I was talking with some students. Let me see if we have any pens here when we want to talk about love. Either you use a Greek Aphrodite, or you have to use that friendly symbol we all use, which, let's be honest, doesn't really represent love. I often joke and say that this actually represents passion. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it ends, and then it all starts over again. In other words, for passion it is nice, but when it comes to love, something like this is a very poor representation. We, who have invented such brilliant technology, have not been able to recreate our symbols. Why is that? Because growing as a human being is not the priority in our society. So, when we will talk about a just, noble action, we have to turn to the righteous action from Indian tradition. When we want to speak of a good example of justice, we have to use the Platonic one. We have not been able to update these things. Why is that? Because this is not important to us, it is not a priority. It is not a priority to be just, but rather to calculate the speed of a spacecraft traveling from one point to another in space. It is as if we knew. Professor George Angel Libraga, who is the founder of New Acropolis, liked to talk about this. It is as if we took a book and knew what the cover is made of, the chemical composition of the ink that colored the cover, the composition of the cellulose inside the paper, the composition of the ink, the weight of the paper, but we do not know how to read. And when someone says, look, all that you know is good, but the most important thing is for you to read, because what is written there points to realities that are not there, they are somewhere else. The person will tell you, no, you are lying, there is nothing written there. They are simply some scattered symbols, and we know everything about these symbols. Their height, when they change, what is the range of their width? We know everything about the symbolism, there is nothing more to know beyond that. Do you understand this comparison? If you were part of an Egyptian civilization, they probably didn't know the exact physical composition of papyrus down to its atoms, but they understood what papyrus referred to in terms of values. For them, transcendent, metaphysical knowledge that concerns humanity itself was more important than dissecting the physical world. Because, as brilliant as they were, if they had wanted to pursue that, they probably would have achieved it. After all, they accomplished feats that still defy the passage of time today, and they reached a very profound understanding of human nature. So we have lost that focus, and when we work with symbols, we are working with ancient, borrowed symbols. And what I find interesting about these writer, Steven Pressfield, for example, is that he is a man of the 21st century, still alive, and through his own life reflections and his study of the classics, he arrives at the same insights that a school of philosophy teaches. If Pressfield's concepts were presented by a philosophy professor from New Acropolis, I wouldn't be surprised. They are very consistent. And he arrived at these conclusions on his own, through reading the classics. He is a genius, because it is not easy to reach such conclusions by oneself, especially when all the values of our time say the opposite. The pressure from society is immense. So, this serves as further evidence to show you that when philosophy addresses something, it is not an isolated voice. It seems that every now and then, a sensible person, someone who thinks independently within humanity and has the capacity to do so, begins to approach everything that we express philosophically. So, this is something we must do. It is a confirmation that good sense leads to values. Good sense leads to a human identity. Whatever name you give to this path, you are essentially saying the same thing that all the valuable philosophical works throughout the history of humanity have expressed. Is that clear? So, let us move on to our topic. For those of you who are aware, this is a course, not just a lecture. Therefore, it is a bit longer, because I set out to do this, especially since the book is a rarity. I set out to bring you the entire book. We have the whole book ahead of us here. So, this will last 3 hours, with a break, so that you don't get overwhelmed by me. But I hope to make these 3 hours enjoyable. 3 hours, including the break, of course. But it will be 2.5 hours of class. So, this is a scene from the book I mentioned to you, which is an Indian epic, the Bhagavad Gita, depicting a prince between two armies, Arjuna between two armies. This Indian epic, which is part of the sacred history of India, portrays a war that is not external, but internal. It is humanity struggling against its own flaws, against inertia, against the enslavement of its instincts, in order to fulfill itself as a human being. This is the oldest and most recurring theme on the face of the earth. If you look closely, even Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are speaking about this. In fact, the Odyssey details this in such a striking way, it is almost overwhelming how much it represents. A person struggling against their own flaws to reach Ithaca, the Shining One, to reach the very essence of this quest. You will see that most of them, the Eddas, the Scandinavians, the Persian Book of Kings, Virgil's Aeneid, classics from the history of humanity, all speak of a war that is not an external war, but a symbolic one, an inner battle within human consciousness to claim one's place in the world, to assert oneself as a human being, to leave a human legacy. Therefore, the war of art that Pressfield speaks of is a reference to this entire tradition, which he himself is familiar with. For those who are not familiar, there is a film in Brazil that was titled Legends of Life. Has anyone seen it? The Legend of Bagger Vance, that one with William Smith? Well, I don't know the names of actors, I just know that one of them was Will Smith. This Legend of Bagger Vance is based on a book by Steven Pressfield, and interestingly, it is the Indian Bhagavad Gita set in the 20th century. It comes from his book called The Legend of Bagger Vance. Bagger Vance was the Bhagavad, the Krishna. And the hero, who was a golfer, Ranulph Junu, represents Arjuna. In other words, it is set in the 20th century. This classic from India. Quite interesting, it was the first successful work that brought recognition to Steven Pressfield. It was the Bhagavad Gita adapted. He loved this book so much. So, it is based on the bibliography that universal philosophy has always used. Therefore, it is another form of the Bhagavad Gita, but in a very current, very modern language, and very well grounded. This is Pressfield. Anyone who wants to become his friend on Facebook, he accepts everyone as a friend. I myself am one of them. It was very easy. He doesn't even know who I am. But he accepted me. He is an American, born in, I don't know why, but for some reason, in Trinidad and Tobago. His parents must have been traveling there. He is a writer and author of plays and film scripts, which was his first profession, though not a very successful one, but still. Later, he became a novelist. When he wrote The War of Art, he began to venture into another field. He was heavily criticized, with people saying he was writing self-help. In reality, self-help, to me, is something quite different from what he does. Self-help, in a certain way, reinforces selfishness, helping oneself. Philosophy is not self-help, it teaches us to help others. It teaches the development of altruism, where you no longer see yourself as the center of the universe. Today, we lack clear criteria. Anything that talks about how to grow is immediately labeled as self-help. To me, anything that reinforces human selfishness and gives more tools for someone to live solely for their own interests is self-help. Anything else is different. Something else is teach a person to be more human, to become integrated into the world, to think more about humanity. That cannot be called self-help. It could be called other help, help for others. And what he does has nothing to do with self-help. In fact, there is a great deal of quality in this regard. There is an enormous number of books, some of which have been published in Portuguese. For those who enjoy his historical novels, no offense to Christian Jacques, who is also very good, but Prest's works are truly incomparable. Gates of Fire tells the story of the warriors of the 300 Spartans, in a way that I honestly don't know how he manages to achieve. Tides of War is recommended even by Oxford professors, so that their students can truly understand what Greece was like, what life in Greece was like, because it is so perfectly crafted. It tells the story of Alcibiades, a great Greek general who incidentally was a disciple of Socrates. His books are truly remarkable. And after he wrote The War of Art, he went on to write several others that are its continuation, which have not yet been translated. Not into Portuguese, that is. One of them is about the warrior's code of ethics. He actually references the warrior ethos quite a lot in The War of Art, and later wrote a book specifically about it. And then there is Turning Pro, which, in a way, becoming in favor. Neither of these books has been translated into Portuguese. It seems that this kind of literature doesn't really haven't much importance here. I would love for it to be translated, because what he produces in this area is truly of the highest quality. So, this is our friend. He structures his work in a very light-hearted and humorous way. The chapters are very short, and it is the kind of book you can read in one sitting, in a single breath. It is one of those books that leaves a lasting impression, because it is so profound. He divides it into 3 parts: defining the enemy, becoming a professional, and the superior kingdom. Among other things that he mentions, because he shares with great humor on his page how the critics tore him apart when he released this book. Among other things, they said it was a religious book because he stated that he believed in God. Self-help, that he was just trying to appeal to people, that he was only interested in making money, everything you can imagine. And then he shares how he learned to deal with criticism without losing his sense of humor. This is one of the things he mentions in this book. So, the book basically begins by dividing itself into these 3 parts. Defining the enemy, which is the first part. Everything you can imagine from this universal literature that speaks about our inner enemy, our struggle to grow, to overcome our selfishness, to avoid being enslaved by our instincts, by survival, our inertia, our laziness, all of it, he gives it a name: resistance. Resistance is the general in arms of all these elements that prevent us from growing. At first, we have a transition to make between 2 worlds. To move from a very animalistic stage, that of an animal endowed with a mind, because the animal is guided by 2 things, the instinct for survival and the instinct to perpetuate the species. If you give the animal a mind and still let it be guided by its instincts, it becomes an animal that amplifies its instincts with the mind. It becomes an extremely dangerous predator. But it does not reach the human stage, because being human means having other goals beyond merely surviving and reproducing. So there is a passage, a transition within the human condition. And the first thing we must identify is what we are fighting against. We are not fighting against anything external. We are fighting against an internal enemy, which may have external allies, but the external allies cannot bring us down, the internal one can. And it is terrible, because the internal enemy, it is not so easy to see. If I'm fighting against her, she is visible. I take my position, she moves over there, and I adjust my stance. But when you are at war with an internal enemy, you become confused with it. There are moments when I hand her the weapon and say, "Go ahead, finish me." We do not know exactly what it is. And his intention, he spent his whole life, and he is a person of great sincerity. In this book, he practically tells his entire life story, a life spent fighting against something he could not see. And when he finally saw it, he named it resistance, and set out to explain how to fight against it. So, he begins to talk about resistance. He starts by describing his daily life. What do? I get up, I have my schedule, everything is timed. I organize my space. I start my day by tidying up my home. He is separated, lives alone. I organize my home, take care of my things, but I have a set time. I know that at that time, I have to sit down and start writing. I will never fall into the mistake of putting the urgent before the important. Because otherwise, a lot of urgent things will start to appear in my life. And what truly matters is to produce that which I was born to do, to fulfill my dream, to deliver the message of my soul to the world. That is what is important, and I cannot let anything take precedence over it. So, no matter what happens, at that set time, I will be sitting and writing. After a certain amount of time, once I have completed my task, I stop. At that time, he talks about a typewriter. The book itself isn't that old. Not really, but I think when he wrote it, people still used that archaeological artifact. He closes his typewriter, and that is it, he feels at peace. Resistance has been overcome for today. Now, I have conquered resistance today, but I have no illusions. Tomorrow morning, it will be waiting for me again with a new strategy. Tomorrow morning, I will have to start all over again, and it will be even stronger. And it will try to trip me up in a different way. What do I know? The hardest thing there is simply to sit down and simply do your work. Someone who is just beginning to face the challenges of life should know this. There is nothing difficult that comes from the outside. The hardest thing is to overcome your own inertia, the clever talk of your mind, the procrastination, the excuses you invent for yourself, to sit down and do your work. No matter what happens. Do not allow any inner negotiations. Sit down and begin to do what is yours to do. That is the most difficult thing. He says, to reach this point, I have fought against every form of resistance you can imagine. And he is going to begin to describe this. It is very interesting how, later on, he will show in great detail this ritual of his daily life. How he prepares his space, what is required of him. He approaches this moment of producing his work as something ceremonial. And everything holds significance for him. And it is inexorable to do what is ours to do. As inexorable as feeding our bodies, for otherwise they would perish. It is to nourish our soul by doing what it came into the world to do. Otherwise, something within you also dies, and you become almost like a zombie. And then you start being tossed around by the distractions of society. He will share some very interesting insights. The unlived life. We have two lives. The ordinary one, this daily routine of surviving, earning our living, eating, sleeping, waking up. And the unlived one, which is the life of our dreams. The one we haven't had time for, and we don't know if we ever will. We don't know if it is worth it. We don't know if we have what it takes, but it never gives up on music, keeps whispering in our ear, always present. It could be a project, a social initiative, a dream, overcoming a flaw, or improving some aspect of your life. There is this unlived life that never gives up on you. He says that resistance is a force that distorts our spirit and makes us smaller than we were born to be. Every human being, as a being, unique and unrepeatable. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher, used to say this: when a human being dies, it is a unique and unrepeatable being with whom I have ceased to interact. Each of us has a message to share with the world, a message that only we can deliver. If we do not fulfill what we came here to do, something will go unsaid. Some words will not be heard. Someone will lose, and some dreams will die, because each of us has a message to give to the world when we fulfill our true nature. The Romans called this the genius. This sacred center, which is yours alone, unique and unrepeatable. Men had a genius, women had a Juno. This was part of their mythology. It was a sacred center, that sacred word for which all humanity waited. For you to speak it, it justified your presence in the world. The universe is a great puzzle, where each of us brings a piece, and each of us has a piece to offer, something to say. Many things will cease to exist if our word is not spoken. We are unique, irreplaceable. We have a mission in the world, which is not simply to survive. If you take, for example, I often joke with my students and ask them to imagine a unicellular being, like an amoeba, that only survives and reproduces. Now take a highly complex being, which is the human being. In general, what does it do as well? It only survives and reproduces. The difference is, with more comfort, more luxury. But that's just a high-tech amoeba, isn't it? Human beings have so much potential, yet many come into the world just to do that. There is something that, if you don't do it, the world will feel its absence. Resistance is harder to overcome than cocaine. Many cripple and distort their lives because of resistance. In other words, it is such a terrible addiction. When you start thinking about doing something, you begin to invent excuses and pretexts. No, tomorrow. Today I have something else to do. Not now. Today isn't the best moment. It is such a terrible addiction, this habit of postponing and running away from ourselves. He says it is easier to free yourself from any drug than to free yourself from resistance. Because at least with cocaine, you always know it is cocaine. Resistance takes on so many faces, justifies itself in so many ways, that you don't even realize you are sabotaging yourself. Resistance is always you undermining your own dreams, but it's difficult to recognize. So he goes on to say, many people distort their lives or even die as victims of resistance. It creates alcoholics, addicts, neurotics, and compulsive individuals. And he says, look, all the escape routes in society are already set up, because everyone is frustrated. So there is already fantasy, alienation, in our case, Big Brother, soap operas, everything is ready for the escape of the victims of resistance, the refugees of resistance. And they end up finding fulfillment in trivialities, just to avoid listening to the call of their own hearts, their own conscience, and to cope with the anguish in which they live. And sometimes, not even that is enough. Sometimes, the anguish is so great that it leads to the development of pathologies. It can even compromise a person's life. In other words, there are many external distractions designed to keep you from listening to yourself. Vocatio comes from voice. It is as if it were a voice. Vocation, vocatio, comes from voice. It is as if there were a voice within us that calls out and speaks. And this? Are you going to give up on this? Who will you be without it? And all the paths are already prepared, because society already knows that a large part of humanity is running away, refugees from themselves. The greatest achievements come from resistance. It is extremely important to understand this. Anything you want to do that takes you from one level of consciousness to a higher one will generate resistance. Now, if it is from a higher level to a lower one, you can rest assured. As my grandmother used to say, when you are going downhill, every saint lends a hand. If you want to overcome any internal or external difficulty, improve a relationship, or carry out altruistic work for humanity, develop an art that benefits yourself and others, do anything that elevates you from one level of consciousness to a higher one, be prepared for heavy resistance. Resistance only appears when you are moving upward, not downward. So, whether it is an artistic calling, starting a new venture, adopting a health regimen, or pursuing spiritual growth, he says, remember the treadmill you have at home and never used? Overcoming an addiction, or pursuing education. In any case, acts of courage, acts of altruism. Wholehearted commitment to something, responding to adversity, postponing any gratification, in other words, not seeking immediate results. To delay gratification a bit, to be able to persist out of duty rather than for a reward. In other words, anything that elevates you will encounter resistance because it comes at you with full force. He speaks extensively about this core of consciousness, which he calls the small self, the chief general of resistance. Its purpose is impersonal, yet absolute. Not letting anything change, nor allowing anyone to grow. It is not a conscious force targeting you, it doesn't even know you exist. But it acts collectively upon the entire structure of humanity, preventing anything from changing, from moving up to the next level. And every human being has faced this. So do not think it is something personal, it is not just you. Resistance is the drama of humanity. And it is something so painful. And sometimes, when humanity sees a person who has overcome resistance, it feels revolt, it feels hatred. Because this exposes it, and shows that it, too, could have done the same. So, the person who overcomes resistance must submit themselves to aggression, sometimes from the outside, to the dissatisfaction of those around them. He will address all of this further ahead. So, to grow as a human being, you can expect resistance. And it plays hard. As you see, characteristics resistance is invisible, yet tangible. It is a force of repulsion, pushing us away from our work. Let's say you are like him, a person who intends to write, and you set your computer on the table. You will notice that the hardest place in the world for you to go is that little table where your computer is. You will find something to do in the kitchen, in the bathroom, at the neighbor's house, downstairs, at the bakery, I don't know what, blah, 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 a phone call. Commitments that have been overdue for 10 years, you will remember you have to take care of them at that very moment, blah, 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 blah. That has a force. A centrifugal force. You won't want to sit there at all. Anything that requires you to have discipline, a sense of commitment, something that lifts your consciousness, generates this centrifugal force. It is terribly hard to overcome. It's a blockage, and we don't realize that it comes from within. Now, I'm someone who would love to write, but I have so many commitments. How many times have I seen people who start doing this? Start the philosophy course, which is a work of self-construction for the human being. Philosophy was born for this purpose. And then the person says, oh, but for so long I wanted to take an English course. Can you believe that now I got a free scholarship? Exactly on that day, there is no other option. I was going to pay $200. Now I will only pay $180. It's such a good discount. Isn't that right? This only happens on that day, and they don't realize that it's resistance. There are people who are at New Acropolis today who tell me, look, when I saw this philosophy course, I thought, I'm going to join. It took me 10 years to actually join. On the day I was going to come, something happened, then something else happened. I didn't make it a priority, and it took me 10 years to get here. Receiving flyers, seeing signs, doing this and that, I don't even know what else. Do you know who postponed it for you for 10 years? Resistance, without a doubt. This happens with anything you do that could elevate you to a higher level. Resistance is internal. It does not arise from any external circumstance or adversary. We will create it and we perpetuate it. It is born from a profound fear, the fear of growth, which is the greatest of all fears. He will mention this. It forces you to reposition yourself in life, and it separates you from the relationships you once had. It is the greatest of all fears. Do not think, I didn't grow because of my boss, my father, my mother, my children, my wife, my mother-in-law, who is always blamed. No. You did not grow because you had a profound fear of growth. The demands that come with it are very heavy. If you shift this responsibility onto someone else, you will not recognize the true adversary. And if you do not see the enemy, you will not be able to overcome it. Resistance is insidious. It lies, seduces, intimidates, and betrays. It takes many forms. Do you think resistance will come to you and say, you are not going to commit yourself? No, because I don't want to. I'm resistance. You would never accept something like that, would you? You won't, because you are afraid, right? No, not at all. I am no coward. I will do it. Resistance will present itself in whatever form finds the most openness in you. It has an incredible ability to take on whatever shape is necessary, always in surprising ways. So, if tomorrow you have committed to doing something and you believe in astrology, your horoscope will be saying, today will be an astral hell, don't get out of bed. If you believe in intuition, today I have a feeling that I should not leave the house. I have already told many of you that once I encountered a platonic laziness. That moment left a strong impression on my memory. We are volunteers at New Acropolis, and I was the head of a school, preparing the school before people arrived. Then a young man arrived, saw that I was tidying up, seemed a bit hesitant, sat down, attended the lecture, and at the end, he came to tell me, look, I really wanted to help you. But Plato says that each person must dedicate themselves to a single craft, the one that is consistent with their own nature. And since I don't have the nature of a cleaner, I could not help you. I was amazed to witness such platonic laziness. This was something new. I had never seen resistance dressed up in this kind of fantasy before. Then I began to believe that, truly, it can come disguised as Buddha, as Christ, as Confucius, as Lao Tse, as anything at all. It can. Resistance always finds a way. It is incredibly multifaceted and will present itself in whatever form is most likely to convince you. Resistance is relentless. It is a machine of destruction that never stops or tires, ever. You will notice that when someone wants to react and work to do something that transforms them, something that adds value to humanity, they will face an unending struggle with resistance. A complacent person who has never fought for anything, if you mention resistance to them, they will say, resistance? What's that? Oh, did you read about that in some self-help book? That doesn't exist, no. In other words, it only shows itself to those who choose to take action, of course. When you don't react, you don't create any trouble. For resistance, that's an easy game. But the more you push back, the more powerful it becomes. And it won't stop until it immobilizes you. Until it convinces you to stay still and give up. It is, in essence, the psychological crowd urging you to just let things be. As long as it hasn't convinced you to give up, it won't stop attacking. He says that, right up to the very end, it will keep coming at you. It never gives up. It is an absolutely inexorable force of nature. Until it gets you back in your seat, it will not stop. And he says that even if we could break resistance down and reduce it to an atom, it would still be an atom that keeps fighting and striking back. It is a program that never stops, ever. It is in its very nature, that is its role in the universe. Resistance is impersonal. In other words, resistance targeted me. No, it targeted you. It doesn't even know who you are. It is part of an impersonal law that serves this function. It exerts a force to hold you back precisely so that, by channeling your will to overcome it, you become greater than you are. Do you understand? It is that step that has been placed in front of you, so that, by channeling a greater strength, you can step up to the next level. You will not rise without facing this wall before you at every step. Isn't that so? If we imagine a staircase, each wall placed before us is resistance. There is only one way to overcome it, by going upward, channeling your will. Otherwise, you won't get out of there. And it's like this for all beings. It's not just you climbing the staircase. The entire universe ascends step by step, rolling along. Am I the only one who has to make this effort? No, all beings grow by facing obstacles. Resistance is infallible. And here is a very good piece of advice it gives. That which most prevents you from acting is probably the best thing you have to do in life. So, it serves as a compass. You know that thing that has been distracting you since the beginning of time? And it's not direct. It doesn't say, don't do this. It uses subtle arguments to it tomorrow, next week. This idea is really good, you know? He is going to talk about this, about procrastination. This idea is really good, but today, Friday. Is today really the day to start something new? On Monday. Actually, even better would be the second semester. It's almost here. Thank you. No, not now. In fact, this year, if you think about it, Kabbalistically, it is not a good year to start something new. Next year. No, the idea is good. It's just that now isn't the time. Soon, just a little bit later. Isn't it like that? I'm on my way. And so it goes. That is its language. You don't recognize it as an enemy. It even seems like it's your friend, like it's helping you. But you never actually go. Faithful to it until the grave. It never let you go. What it has blocked you from the most up to now is probably what you most need to do. So, it is a compass. As the Dalai Lama says, we learn a lot from our enemies. It tries to stop us precisely in the direction where we would be most useful. The more important something is for the evolution of our soul, the more resistance it generates. In other words, when something is best for you, the resistance will be greater. Resistance is universal. Everything that has a body suffers from it. To grow, all things must face resistance. To fall, it is easy. It is the law of gravity. To grow, there is resistance. Resistance never sleeps. Fear never abandons us. It is a battle to be fought every day. Because, as he will reiterate, resistance's main weapon is fear. It instills fear in you, and if you try to do it now, it will get in your way. You start a philosophy course on Thursday. Oh, Thursday is such a bad day. It is already close to the weekend. You might be invited to an event and already be committed to this. Look, if I were you, I would think carefully about it. So it always works by intimidating you with all kinds of things. Its fundamental weapon is fear, from the simplest to the most powerful forms. It tells you that you are going to waste your life on this. This is nonsense. Time is passing by. Go enjoy yourself. I remember, I have already lost students because of this. A friend came up to him and said, "You are studying philosophy, but philosophy doesn't fill your pockets. Go have fun, you are so young." Soon, life will pass you by, and you will have lost your youth without enjoying it. But the truth is, he enjoyed himself by studying philosophy. which is also a way of experiencing joy. This is the voice of resistance, which sometimes finds external allies. Resistance plays to win. Its target is the gift that brought us into this world, and its goal is to destroy it. It does not play around. Its purpose is to eliminate from you any drive to climb to the next level. It does not aim to reduce or to make you do less. It aims to wipe you out. It is an infallible and merciless warrior. As long as you want to fight back, it will keep attacking until you settle and nearly survive. Then, calmly, it will leave you alone. Resistance feeds on fear. The strength of resistance comes from our fear. To master it is to overcome resistance. Now, one of the things he will say is that mastering it is not the same as overcoming it, because no one overcomes fear. Fear is a force of nature that will always, eternally, accompany you. But fear is not necessarily meant to stop you. It is there so that you move forward with greater prudence. It's silly to think that the great warriors of the past did feel fear. They did, and it warned them that they needed to double their attention. Fear does not have to be in front of you, paralyzing you. It can be behind you, pushing you forward. He will talk about an actor later on. He will mention this, an American actor named Henry Fonda, whom you may know, who says that at 75 years old, having worked in shows, theater, and television since his early 20s, at 75 years old, before going on stage, he would feel sick. He would vomit from nervousness, from fear. So, he would go to the bathroom, vomit, clean himself up, get ready, and then go on stage. Always, his whole life, with 10 minutes to go, it was always the same. But to stop feeling fear, that's foolishness. You are not going to stop. Now, that is not a reason for you to become paralyzed. Resistance plays with fear. We have to learn how to deal with fear, not eliminate it, but master it. Because to eliminate it, we will never eliminate it. But it can become our ally. It operates in only one direction. Only from a lower sphere to a higher one. It will say, "You are doing work." For Mother Teresa of Calcutta's mission, you decided to leave everything behind to start a telemarketing company. Go ahead, resistance will even pay for your ticket. If you are going downward, no problem. It will only get in your way when you try to rise. It operates in only one direction. To rise, hold on. To go down, it is easy. It will make your life easier, you will see. From a higher level to a lower one, there is no resistance. And it is strongest in the final stretch. Now I have achieved this goal. I'm almost there. Now I can relax. Don't relax until you have reached solid ground. Because resistance, in the final stretch, attacks with everything it has. He mentions the example of Ulysses in the Odyssey. He is arriving at Ithaca. He can see Ithaca. Smoke is rising from the houses. Then he had a bag of winds, which had been given to him by the god Aeolus, so he could reach his homeland more quickly. The adverse winds had been trapped inside it. He decided to take a short nap. And his sailors thought that the bag contained gold. They decided to open it to steal from him. Then the winds were released, and they ended up on the other side of the sea again. They lost the entire journey and had to start all over. In the final stretch, do not fall asleep. Because it is in the final stretch that resistance attacks with all its might. When it sees that you are about to cross the finish line, that is when it throws everything it has at you. It does not give up. If we could learn from it and have that same objectivity and effectiveness in achieving our goals, we would be set for life. Resistance is relentless. It never sleeps. Any doubts, everyone? Any questions? Continuing on, existence recruits allies. I find this one very interesting. There is a tacit agreement to keep everyone stuck in the same mire. They feel betrayed. This idea of recruiting allies is truly fascinating. You begin to pursue what you have always dreamed of. You dedicate yourself to that volunteer work. You start a journey of self-discovery. You are doing what you set out to do. And then, the people around you start to behave in strange ways. Your parents call and argue with you, your wife gives you the cold shoulder, your husband, the dog bites you, the neighbor decides to take up drumming. In other words, everything around you starts to short-circuit. And people say, look, they don't know it, they are not aware, but they are trying to sabotage you. It is a terrible thing for a human being to realize that they are being defeated by their own demons while you are overcoming yours. That exposes things, you see? If someone else is succeeding, it means I could succeed too. That is a tragedy. It exposes my own mediocrity, creates a sense of anguish, and you end up being seen as a traitor. Then he goes on to talk about this example, which is excellent. His examples are very funny. He says, the greatest sin of the crab is to try to climb out of the bucket. If you stay inside the bucket with all the other crabs, everything is fine. But if you climb up to the edge of the bucket, you prove that all the others are complacent. They remain in the bucket simply because they are too lazy to try to escape. Do you understand? I always mention that example from when you were a child and you went to school and you had studied, but none of your friends had studied. Then you got a good grade, and they wanted to beat you up, because if everyone got a 0, it was the teacher's fault, wasn't it? And you exposed everyone by proving that it was possible to get a good grade. In other words, there is a tacit agreement to remain in mediocrity. Anyone who reacts is seen as a traitor. It's a harsh reality. They even say that someone who works in the literary field, for example, faces specialized criticism, which, in general, is not as specialized as we might think. It is extremely harsh with someone who is emerging, breaking away from trends, and daring to do what they truly love. It is relentless. Then you look and can clearly see who is an honest critic and who is a critic that simply wants to destroy you, because you did what they lacked the courage to do. You can clearly see when envy is present. So, there is tremendous resistance. And this resistance exists on the outside as well, because people feel uncomfortable with someone who is betraying complacency. Resistance and procrastination. He says that the best thing you can do for others is to move forward and set an example. Move on. Because then you truly prove that it is possible to move forward. And it helps this person to have more arguments against their own resistance. There is no point in staying behind, trying to reconcile. That is just another argument for resistance. You will not reconcile. People will only give up if you stop. And stopping is not an option for you. So move and set an example. At a certain point, you will see that some will be inspired by you and will begin to walk on their own. His website, filled with messages from people who write to him because of this book, you have no idea. There are thousands of people who felt encouraged to fight against their own resistance because of him. Resistance and procrastination. He goes on to talk about these rationalizations. Rationalization is like the employee who manages the boss image. There is always a good reason to justify whatever resistance wants. As I mentioned to you, it doesn't come with just any argument. It comes with a strong, first-rate argument. So it is always this thing, and I want is replaced by I will, tomorrow. This becomes a habit. It is always just a little later, always I will tomorrow. There are people, it is funny, because Brasilia is a big city, but sometimes we still run into people on the street. There are people who have been telling me they are going to take the philosophy course next week, for about 10 years now. And that next week is still coming. To this day, it hasn't arrived. And it's not that the person is lying, not to me, but to themselves. There's always something, always an argument, and there always will be. And when will it ever happen that nothing at all is going on in our lives? We will do things when we decide to do them, in spite of whatever may happen. I remember some of my students, we would sometimes go out to promote the school, and it was incredible, because everything seemed to happen whenever we planned to go out and hand out flyers. So we had an agreement among ourselves. It was a very young, joyful group. We used to say, if the apocalypse comes and Angel Gabriel comes in through the window playing his trumpet, we would just ask him to provide the soundtrack and we would hand out the flyers anyway. Because that's the only way we would actually go out. Otherwise, we would never leave. Because everything would happen, a power outage, there'd be a traffic jam at the school entrance. Everyone had other commitments. No, now, even if it's Judgment Day, we would go anyway. With the Angel Gabriel playing his trumpet and providing the soundtrack. A musical background with an angelical artistic touch. Because there's no other way. If you don't recognize that this is important and commit to doing it, there will always be excuses not to. And sometimes, these excuses become increasingly complex. Resistance in sex. He says that sex, chocolate, television shows, everything that is pleasurable and brings short-term satisfaction is a feast for resistance. Sex isn't always a form of resistance. But he explains that it is a very effective tool for resistance to use because it provides quick gratification. And you can tell when it is resistance because afterward it leaves you with a terrible inner emptiness. You realize that you deceived yourself, that you got tangled up just to avoid your responsibilities once again. So, whether it is with drugs, compulsive shopping, where you always feel like something is missing from your life, something external rather than internal, TV, gluttony, and so on. Distraction comes in the form of easy and cheap bribes. Resistance bribes you, it offers you small change. It gives you candy to distract you from doing what you truly need to do. Things that bring quick satisfaction, because building oneself does not bring instant gratification. This is one of the things he says about the person who builds. Building oneself means knowing how to accept delayed satisfaction. You cannot expect quick results, because growth is neither easy nor fast. You cannot expect approval from others, because sometimes it comes, and sometimes it does not. So, it is a resistance that is postponed, a love for your own work. And one of the things that resistance will do is attack with things that bring quick gratification. This is a very common tool. Resistance and problems. I find this quite amusing. A person keeps getting involved in problems. They do not realize it, but they create these problems to avoid doing what they need to do. So, the individual is sick, fought with the neighbor, argued with the family, lost their job, started drinking, has a habit of sleeping in late. He invents problems to escape from himself. Neurosis, jealousy, anything at all. The artist does not tolerate confusion in their life because it prevents them from doing their work. So, there simply won't be confusion in their life because they choose not to allow it. If the neighbor stops at their door, they won't even look because they have more important things to do. They won't argue with the neighbor, they don't have time for that. He has more important things to do. If his parents are stressed, that's fine. Today, he won't talk to them, he will talk to them tomorrow. I will not argue with no one, I don't have time to waste on that. He won't get involved in any kind of confusion. He will speak of other problems. Of problems that are dramatizations, which are amusing, because these involve a tacit pact of dramatization. It is said that there are entire families that seem to have made an agreement among themselves to always be generating some kind of drama. When the level of drama drops, someone steps in and points something out. So-and-so drank and got drunk. Everyone goes on and on. The mother cries, the wife leaves the house. When that ends, the youngest daughter shows up with a tattoo. Blah, 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 blah. He says that the whole family stays there, fueling the rocket. And in all of this, no one does anything. He says that resistance is like a Santa Claus who leaves laughing with rosy cheeks. In this house, no one is going to do anything. So, a culture of dramatization develops, one after another. He assures that everyone will get caught up in this, and no one will do their work. For those who have something to do, have you ever heard that Leonardo da Vinci stopped painting his masterpieces because he got caught up in some family drama? We don't even know who his family was, he was there, painting. Mozart says, no, him with an existential problem. Today, I will not compose this symphony. What existential problem? What do you mean? He didn't even know what that was, he was completely immersed in his work. Those who have something important and meaningful to accomplish know they have no time to waste on these emotional habits. We create them as yet another way to escape from ourselves. But it's just another excuse. With this difficult life I have, no one could do anything. Do you think that everyone who achieved something had an easy life? Did you know that Tolstoy had 18 children? Bach had about 12, and around 8 of them died along the way. Do you really think that anyone who accomplished something great had an easy life? In other words, these things may indeed be true and difficult, but even so, many human beings did not let them stop them from doing what they needed to do. Resistance and self-medication. And then I thought it was great, wonderful. Many illnesses are actually marketing strategies. This individual worked in so many different fields that it is hard to imagine it all fitting into a single lifetime. He was a Marine, he worked at the port docks, he drove trucks. He will share these stories everywhere. There was a time in his life when he said he worked at a marketing agency, and his boss would come to him and say, make up a disease so we can sell the medicine for it. So he says that these modern illnesses are not created by doctors, they are created by marketing specialists. That's where things like panic syndrome, empty nest syndrome, and so on come from. In reality, it's nothing more than the existential anguish of not fulfilling your dreams. Then they come up with 1,000 names, provide justifications, create medications, and even invent spas for people to go to, and so on. It's a bunch of nonsense that, in the end, leads nowhere. It's not that real depression doesn't exist, but much of what is called depression is actually existential anguish from not doing what we came into this world to do. It is a longing for ourselves, a frustration with the way we are living. So, he will say that depression and anxiety can be real, but they can also be a form of resistance. Be careful. Instead of self-knowledge, self-discipline, delayed gratification, and hard work. Which is the life of a professional, of someone who takes life seriously. You numb yourself with medication so you don't feel the burning of your soul. And you move on. Are you feeling good? Ah, the medication worked. He is happy. He should not be living this way. He shouldn't be happy. Because the only chance a person has is not to be happy. If someone lives a mediocre life and is happy, that's the end of them. Do you realize that? As my grandmother used to say, necessity is what teaches the frog to jump. If you don't achieve any of your dreams and you are happy, you are lost. So, sometimes you put these elements in place as a substitute for true fulfillment. It allows you to live more or less comfortably and just let things go. Resistance and victimization. This is interesting, because I have experienced this myself and I know it is true. I used to work, and I still work today, in public service, in a place where I work close to several doctors. And the director of the place where I work was a very good cardiologist and had many patients. Every day she would come to us, after seeing 30 people, and at the end she would give us the statistics. One person was actually sick, and 29 were making a fuss. The next day, 35 patients, 25 making a fuss, 5 actually sick. Those were the really good days. There were 5, sometimes 7, occasionally 10 people who were truly ill, at most. The rest was just drama. Then she said that her specialty was exactly what he was talking about. Putting on a neutral face and pretending to believe what the person was saying. Oh really? Is that what you're feeling? Why don't you try taking something for that? Then she would give them some medicine for a headache. This will make you feel better. Because, in truth, the person was just feeling lonely and wanted a little attention, nothing more. So, resistance and victimization. 70 to 80% of patients are making a drama out of it. Because this illness, this cross to bear, is their way of saying, through this sickness, with this problem, I cannot do anything. So, I found someone to blame. I have my cross to bear. I can't do anything about a problem like this. Imagine, it's like that. Have you ever heard that silly joke about the 2 friends who are alcoholics? They decided to quit drinking, both of them, and go on a fishing trip. Do you know that one? It's a very silly and not very good joke, but it fits the situation perfectly. Both of them stopped drinking and decided to go fishing. Then one of them opened the other's bag and found it full of bottles of cachaca. Are you out of your mind? Didn't we agree that we were going to stop drinking? You are bringing cachaca? No, you are misunderstanding me, man. I'm taking cachaca because we are going deep into the woods. You know there are snakes out there. What if we get bitten by a snake? You know alcohol is good for that. All right, in that case, go ahead. Then he saw another bag and asked, and what's this? These are the snakes, just in case there aren't any out there. So, just imagine, if I actually got rid of this problem, what a mess that would be. So, I'm always cultivating my problems, because what if I suddenly get better? What a predicament. How will I handle not having anything to do? What if? So I can never be free from it. I always have to carry a cross. And he says this is a form of passive aggression. Because the person who is immobilized by resistance also contributes to the resistance of those around them, using blackmail, always threatening. If you don't pay attention to me, I might get worse, I might die. In other words, they manipulate their victimhood to make others hostage to their problem. In other words, be careful with victimization. Don't do this, because in addition to feeding your own resistance, you also trap everyone around you. You don't engage people through what you can offer them, through your qualities as a human being, but rather through the fear that you might take your own life, die, or have a crisis. This is manipulation, a form of enslavement. Do not play the victim, which is one of the favorite vices of our current era. He states this clearly. If you are playing the victim, stop now. It is the worst tool of resistance. Resistance also appears in the choice of a partner. He says it is very common that when a person feels deep anguish for not fulfilling their own dreams, they seek out someone who is fulfilling theirs. And then they say, so, since I can't do what I dream of, I will help someone else achieve theirs. He says, this is foolishness. Why? First of all, the fact that someone else is fulfilling their dreams should serve as encouragement for you to pursue your own, not as a reason to worship someone else's achievements and erase yourself in the process. And it is also harmful for the person who accepts this, because no one should accept that another lives with the sole mission of idolizing their personality and to erase themselves. So, do not try to ride on someone else's achievements, because that is not real. Fulfillment is not something that can be shared as a couple. It is individual, unique to each person. You may have heard that Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert Schumann, was also a composer. And now, many wonderful things she created are being discovered, but she did not publish them. Do you know why? Out of fear of overshadowing her husband's career. And this is very strange, both for her and for anyone who would accept such a thing. Resistance and this book. He goes on to say, look, when I thought about writing this book, you have no idea what resistance told me. That I was a novelist, that this seemed like a self-help book, that it was arrogant. That I wanted to write a book as if I were trying to present myself as an educator to the world, that people would misinterpret it, that it wouldn't be well received, that I did not have the standing to position myself as an educator of human beings, and that it would be better to write a novel in present resistance in a diluted way, as if it were just a problem faced by a character. It told me so many things, and the arguments seemed so reasonable, but I gave up. The only thing that warned me I was wrong was the level of unhappiness I began to feel. Then, when I sat down and started to write, it went away. It was a frustration. That level of unhappiness, I noticed it. All of this may be true, but it is not enough to paralyze me. He said that he almost didn't write this book. And everything that resistance told him would happen actually did, because he was indeed criticized. Even so, it was still worth it. We are here today because he overcame resistance. Today, we are talking about this. Resistance is unhappiness. He is going to talk about the symptoms. He will say that it seems like life, but it is actually resistance. It happens to everyone. It seems like a normal logic of life. But no, this is actually the sequence of resistance. First, there was already boredom. Everything you do is not what you would truly like to be doing. Life seems like a repetitive cycle, where you are always doing the same thing and nothing brings you happiness or fulfillment. Then comes displeasure, bitterness. After that, since you are so distressed and do not enjoy anything you do, you start seeking out vices to bring some flavor to life. Then you become gluttonous, compulsive, you gain weight, you drink, sometimes you use drugs, sometimes you become compulsive about shopping. In short, you start looking for distractions. After that, the dissatisfaction becomes so great, because as soon as the alienation passes, the pain returns, and this begins to develop psychosomatic illnesses. And a person can truly end up destroying themselves. If not by taking their own life, which is unfortunately very common, because this kind of frustration can lead to depression, dependency, self-destruction, or because they actually became ill, unable to bear the level of unhappiness in which they lived. There are these two possibilities. So, he says that consumer culture exploits this with medications and entertainment. In other words, it creates escape routes so that you spend your entire life running away from yourself. When I give lectures about loneliness, I talk a lot about this. We teach how to deal with loneliness and explain that the worst kind of loneliness is being out of touch with yourself. A person can feel more alone in Sao Paulo, in Greater Sao Paulo, than in a small town of 100,000 inhabitants. And there is no use trying to teach someone how to deal with this, because they want to deal with it. They are afraid, because loneliness forces them to be with themselves, and they don't want to face themselves. They disrupt their own life, create chaos, and leave no time for anything. Why? Out of fear of meeting themselves. So, it is one distraction after another. They leave a group of friends, get home, pick up the phone, turn on the television, silence and inner dialogue, and inner life, never. There can't be any time left for that, because it would be unbearable. Life becomes an escape from oneself. This is typical of resistance, of plugging into the system and understanding that we will only find happiness by doing our true work. I was telling you all this as a well-known example in my lectures, but it is worth revisiting. I spoke about that hero from the Greek War. The Battle of Marathon, which was fought only against the Persians. There was a citizen named Phidippides, who was not only an excellent warrior, but also a very skilled runner. And in this battle, it was very likely that the Greeks would lose, because the Persians had a significant numerical advantage. So, the Greeks went into battle expecting defeat. If the Persians were to win, they would come and destroy Athens, desecrate the temples, and bring an end to everything. So, they had agreed that, on a specific day and at a specific time, the Greeks who remained in the city would gather all the sacred symbols and abandon Athens. But if Athens won the battle, they needed to send word, because otherwise the city would be destroyed and deserted unnecessarily. And, against all odds, they won. Somehow, they managed to win. These are those historical events that we cannot quite understand, but they won. So they sent Phidippides, who was known for his speed, to inform the inhabitants of Athens. From this event was born the marathon competition. He ran like a madman, racing toward Athens. It is said that after such an exhausting battle, he arrived with just enough breath to utter a single phrase, "We have won," and then collapsed, dead. Poof. I find this story very interesting. Imagine if he hadn't had the breath to speak that word. Athens would have been destroyed, simply because he did not say the word that was his to speak. Do you realize that we, too, have come into this world to say a word? And that so much will go unbuilt, or even be destroyed, if we do not say what is ours to say. Before we fall, we must ensure that our word, the sacred word, that which we came into this world to speak, is indeed spoken. Something will be lost, something sacred will be destroyed, if we fall without saying what we came here to say. Resistance and fundamentalism. He will say that, in truth, the artist and the fundamentalist are people who, more or less, begin from a similar impulse, which is this impulse to find oneself, to fulfill oneself. But one retreats out of fear, and the other moves forward. But they share more or less the same root. Both the artist and the fundamentalist seek the mysteries of existence as individuals. He will speak about the tribal stages. He says it is an interesting thing, because when you live in a tribe, in a small community, life is completely defined. Everything is defined. All the individuals, what they will do, their social roles. When society expands into a city of, I don't know how many millions, like New York, for example, and many others out there, life, it becomes impossible to control each individual. So, it creates a margin of freedom, where each person must find their own meaning for themselves, rather than having it defined by society. Some, whether because the conditions favored them or because they already possess greater maturity, are able to rise above and truly develop their creativity, shaping their own lives. Others are frightened by this, and they view all innovation, all individuality. Do you remember that young woman who dared to study? The one who won the Nobel Peace Prize? All individuality, all innovation is seen as something diabolical. How good were those times when everything was predetermined and life was entirely prescribed? In other words, they long for a return to the fundamentals, a return to a past where life seemed better. And they do not consider that the world holds any mystery to be discovered, any truth to be unveiled. For them, the mystery and the truth are already contained in a certain book, already revealed by someone. There is no mystery left to uncover. One must simply obey certain precepts and suppress innovation. So, it is not that the fundamentalist lacks creativity, but rather that their creativity is primarily directed toward inventing a devil, against whom they will struggle their entire life. They define themselves in opposition to this devil. And the devil, if you look at it symbolically, is actually the voice of their own calling, inviting them to fulfill themselves. It is the urge to break free from that very limited script of choices. So, the voice against which they struggle, their devil, is usually the demands of their own soul, urging them to grow. And they react violently, demonizing this voice out of fear, so that all their creativity is not directed toward building, but rather toward destroying this devil. There is no truth to seek. The truth has already been revealed. Whether in a religious book, a political book, a Marxist text, whatever it may be, the truth is already revealed. One must be faithful to it and return to the past. And so, they become a steamroller, set on destroying everything that deviates from this script. Anything that strays, any form of individuality, any kind of personal fulfillment, is seen as something demonic. I find it interesting because his attitude is quite, well, humble, and I also believe in the things he says. He says that the artist had favorable circumstances, good karma. He believes in humanity, in its slow progress. The fundamentalist, on the other hand, thinks that humanity is heading toward ruin, toward hell, and sees no hope at all, and lacks a creative impulse. For the fundamentalist, the truth has already been revealed. The world is in decline, and he seeks a return to the fundamentals. He would say, look, I wouldn't say that if I had been born into very adverse circumstances, I would have been able to establish myself as an artist, even though my life wasn't exactly easy. But I was born into circumstances that, at least, did not block me so much. I don't have such a high level that, if I were born in a country perhaps deeply fanatical, with a great degree of repression, I would be able to overcome that. Sometimes, the circumstances are extremely difficult, and a person may not have the maturity to rise above them. I feel the same way. I believe we must make the most of what Eastern tradition calls good karma. At this moment, you have the conditions to seek your true self. Do you think that we, at our current stage of evolution, I am speaking about myself, if I had been born in the heart of 5 Points, in the slums of 5 Points, in the very center of it, would I have been able to become a philosopher? Personally, I would not. With such overwhelming adversity, at the level of today, someone would have been able to rise above it. Stauncher than me. So I had, as people say, positive karmic conditions. Circumstances that favored me. I take advantage of this and strive to make the most of my time to do something meaningful with this life. He says, then, that at their root, both fundamentalism and art are born from the same source. When faced with the possibility of building oneself, when confronted with individuality, one retreats in fear while the other moves forward. One demonizes this, while the other embraces it as a necessary process of evolution and seeks to do it also for the sake of humanity. So, in general, fundamentalists in this regard are those who have failed, seeking to restore hope and pride. And they are destructive. It is very common when countries lose a war, or when they go through some very serious economic and social hardships. Instead of recognizing their own flaws, they begin to demonize foreign countries. It was American imperialism that left us like this. Oh, it was this person, it was that one. It wasn't our own incompetence in managing our lives. They have to blame an external demon so they don't have to take responsibility for their own mistakes. That is a recipe for the birth of fundamentalism. Resistance and criticism. This is also very beautiful, what he says. Criticism is a clear symptom of resistance. A person who is striving to achieve their dreams has neither the time nor the interest to criticize anyone. On the contrary, if they offer someone a suggestion, it is to help them grow, not to break them down. Criticism is a symptom of someone who is being defeated by resistance and cannot accept that someone else is succeeding. The critic is someone who needs to project their own failure onto others. They are embittered, because a person who is fulfilled does not have time to go looking for faults in others. On the contrary, they seek to help others grow when they are asked to do so. This is a clear characteristic of resistance. Resistance and a lack of self-confidence. Am I an artist? Am I a philosopher? Am I really who I am? I don't know what I am. He says, look, well, that is synonymous with being. Because when a person has doubts, it is a sign that they are afraid. And fear, in general, points in the direction of your potential. The vain, the arrogant, generally are not like that. Look at how good I am. I am this or that. Imagine, I have no doubt at all about what I'm. He says, look, resistance actually laughs at this kind of person. Because by believing they already are, they do not strive to become. They remain blocked at that level. The one who is afraid, who has doubts, will fight, will grow, step by step, will win the battle, trench by trench. So, the fact that you are afraid of something is already a good sign, and it is probably the right path for you. Have you ever heard about that girl from Brasilia who was terrified of fish and decided to dedicate herself to the sport of sailing, to sailing boats? She said, either I ran away from the fish or I ran toward it. And she chose to face her fear and built an international sports career. Fear signals, here you have potential. We either run from it or run toward it. Resistance in fear. Fear is an indicator of the magnitude of resistance and the size of the dream. For example, the actor who accepts a role because he's afraid of it. He says that there is an interview show in the US where they ask, "Why did you take on that character?" "Because I was very afraid of it." In other words, the size of your fear is related to the size of the challenge it presents to you and the amount of growth you will experience on the other side. So, this issue of fear doesn't have to be in front of you, holding you back. It can be behind you, pushing you forward. We will take a break soon, so don't worry. Resistance and love are proportional to each other. He says, well, if we didn't love this dream, we wouldn't be afraid. Resistance is proportional to the potential for love we have for things. I love this dream so much, and that is why it brings me so much fear and so much resistance. And this ensures that, in the end, the fulfillment will also be immense. Resistance is like being a star. It is what we were just talking about, the person who thinks highly of themselves, because resistance loves the vain. Jung called this ego inflation. I dream I'm on the 5th step when I'm still on the 1st. It looks beautiful, but nothing will get done. The first time you fall, you won't get back up. A person who truly wants to fulfill their dreams is patient and persistent. They do not indulge in fantasies. They know they will have to face criticism. They know that no one will recognize their efforts. They know all of this and more. They are patient and provide assurance to themselves. They vouch for themselves, do not need external approval, and find fulfillment in the act of doing. They do not expect anything to be easy. Nature does not make leaps. This kind of fantasy, I will go there, I will win, sounds great. But resistance defeats this kind of person with just a breath. Resistance and isolation. This is very profound. There is a passage where he says that when a person distances themselves from the camp, when they step away from the collective, they fear that people will abandon them, that they will be rejected by the tribe, that they will lose friends, and that their family will drift away. This brings about a terrible fear. And he says, look, this is the kind of thing that does not actually happen. As soon as you distance yourself from one group, you will begin to draw closer to another. Other people who are also striving and persevering. Your own work becomes a wonderful companion. You never see an artist feeling lonely while doing what they have set out to do. Or a person who works for the good of humanity. They are always accompanied by their dreams. New relationships will come, and a new world will emerge. He says that automatically, when a person steps away from the camp, the muse lands on their shoulder like a butterfly. In other words, this kind of loneliness does not exist. He says, for example, I'm in the company of my characters, who are sometimes more interesting than anyone I know. I don't even notice time passing, just like a child at play. Sometimes, our work is a version of ourselves that is more engaging than any real person. How beautiful is that? As soon as we step away from the glow of the campfire, our muse lands on our shoulder like a butterfly. The act of courage, unfailingly, evokes the deepest part of our being, which supports and sustains us. In other words, the person who finds themselves is never alone. He can be with others and has something to offer them. And when he is by himself, he is also enjoying his own company. But when he is with people, he is the one who has the most to give, the most to share. Resilience and healing. It's also quite amusing that he talks about these trendy therapeutic places where people go saying, I'm very frustrated, I'm very anxious, and then they take certain natural remedies, exercise, and so on. I don't know what else, just to be able to relieve stress. He says, look, our essence, the one that seeks to express itself through our work, does not suffer at all from life's adversities. On the contrary, it is actually enriched by them. It is yet another opportunity that it will add as experience. These places are meant to pamper the personality, not to help your essence manifest itself more fully. Our essence, he says, is bulletproof. It is not affected by external circumstances. If you dive within yourself and find this center of yours, any suffering you may experience will actually enrich it, giving it more experience. You will see that these great novelists in history, when they suffered, wrote novels better. The more they were discriminated against, the better their work became. There is something within us that is only enriched by experience, something that stands above circumstances. Spoiling your personality will not help you become better, because when you return to life, you will suffer again and feel the need to go back to a spa. Every time life hits you, you will feel like you need to go to a spa, so it would be better to just create a spa and live inside it. Because the process of creation is subject to all kinds of suffering. Resistance and support. I will gather my family, I will share my dream, and they will help me. That is what you wish for, right? But that is actually a declaration of incompetence. Doing what you must do is up to you alone. No one else will truly understand. And you cannot do it with someone else's strength. The hit has to be your own. The most that people can do is wave to you from the harbor. No one can do it for you. Either you have the strength to do it, or it simply won't happen. You cannot fulfill your dreams with borrowed energy. In other words, seeking support, finding places to relax and relieve stress. He will talk about his experience as a naval warrior. The ability to live with adversity, and even to take a certain pride in it. This creative center, which is our very essence as human beings, cannot be reached by just anything. Quite the opposite, in fact. Adversity actually stimulates your spirit of challenge and your imagination. He will say that the psychic energy spent brooding over everything that was done to you is a waste of time and resilience. Oh, how unfair the world is. So-and-so did this, someone else did that. My father told me such and such when I was a child. How can I possibly be a fulfilled person with a past like this? Forget it. That is resistance. People who have achieved fulfillment have had all kinds of parents throughout human history. And they did what they had to do, in spite of all that. Forget it. Complaints, lamentations, and self-pity. Resistance and rationalization, also very interesting. He will say that rationalization is like, it is like those of us who work with an advisor who manages the boss image. There are always plausible justifications for you not to do things, but none of them are enough, as we have already discussed. There have been people who were ill, people with cancer who won the Olympics, people with many children who wrote novels, people with physical disabilities who uncovered the mysteries of astronomy. There have been people facing enormous challenges, and yet, they still went out there and made their mark. Therefore, it may even be that the arguments of resistance are true, but they are not enough to stop you. In other words, yet another deception. And resistance can be overcome. The great works of humanity are proof of this. If someone had not overcome resistance, who would have composed the Ninth Symphony? Who would have built Hagia Sophia? Who would have sculpted Moses? If someone had not overcome resistance, the most beautiful things we have would not exist. The great works are the legacy of those who overcame resistance. And if one person succeeded, it means that we also have this possibility within us. I'm not saying that we will build Hagia Sophia or sculpt Moses, but something grand, proportional to our own abilities, we will accomplish. Because the human being is a magnificent being, and we have come into this world to leave our mark. We cannot allow ourselves to settle for mediocrity, because that is the root of unhappiness and all the ills of the world. Now we will move on to the second part. Let's take our break. My life is divided into before and after I became a professional. The word amateur comes from love. But, in general, people tend to think that a professional is someone who works for money, while an amateur works out of love. They say that is not quite accurate. An amateur, in truth, is someone who lacks the seriousness, commitment, and responsibility necessary to overcome resistance. They approach things as if it were a sport, as if it were just a game. They treat their calling as a sport, as something secondary in life. That doesn't work. It takes dedication, enthusiasm, and enough strength to be able to overcome resistance. So, the amateur never truly loves. They have a passion for things, but they do not possess a committed love strong enough to actually accomplish them. Now, let's talk a bit about the mindset of an amateur versus a professional. An amateur does things for fun, only when there's spare time. So, imagine, for example, a poet. When I have a little free time, I'll go and write a poem. A writer, or someone engaged in social work, if I have nothing else to do, I go and contribute a little. This is typical of an amateur. A professional, on the other hand, is fully committed. They do it consistently, every single day. Just as one works to nourish the body every day, one's dream nourishes the soul and must also be pursued daily. He maintains a constant commitment to this. The amateur treats it as a pastime. The professional acts out of vocation. It is inexorable. He knows that this is the most important thing in his life. The amateur dedicates only part of his time to it. A professional, all of his time. Every moment he can devote to what he believes is noble and good, he will dedicate to it. There is nothing more important in his life than the fulfillment of his soul. And he will take it seriously. He fights for it every day. The amateur treats it as a side job, as a secondary occupation. Whereas for the professional, it is a true activity of full dedication. For him, it is a matter of life or death. And just as a professional, let's say, in a work relationship, is there every day, clocking in, carrying a responsibility, holding a commitment. A true professional also does this. And because of this, he manages to overcome resistance and accomplish things worthy of note. You will not find anyone in history who has done something important by acting only occasionally, only when they had nothing else to do. A great artist, a great warrior, a great politician, a great social activist, someone who has done work for humanity. Who are these people? Did they only act when they had nothing else to do, as a pastime, as a hobby? Do you realize that those who accomplished something gave their lives for it? It was a serious, constant, and persevering dedication. That is what it means to be a professional. He is going to share some tips on how to be a professional. Very interestingly, it is said that the writer Somerset Maugham was once asked, "Do you write all the time or only when you are inspired?" He supposedly replied, "I write only when the inspiration strikes." Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Of course, only when the inspiration comes, but I prepare myself and create the right environment for it to come. It comes every day because I'm there every day. In other words, punctually, every day I sit down to work and wait for it. I do my part. I create the conditions for it to arrive. And that is exactly what he does, Pressfield. Inexorably, at that time, in front of his computer. Punctuality, seriousness, tuning his clock to that of the muse. So, he talks a little about his daily routine. He wakes up, takes care of his daily chores, cleans the house. This is very beautiful. Later on, he will talk more about this. He makes the environment as suitable as possible. He believes that physical order influences mental order. There is a beautiful passage where he says this. I even clean the little doormat at the door, so that when the muses enter, they do not soil their clothes. And then he sits down, says a prayer, and begins to create. And he works until the scheduled time. He clocks in and out. Let's see how beautifully he speaks about this. He says that you must be relentless with resistance. An alcoholic knows that if he stops drinking, just one drink can bring him down. It's the same thing with resistance. If you pause even once, you might never return. If you stop for 3 months to do something else, you might stop forever. Do not think that what I do is because I believe my work is indispensable. If I don't do it, humanity will not perish. It is indispensable for me because I came into this world to be human. It is the outcome of my existence. Perhaps humanity will do just fine. If I don't do what I must, maybe it's not that important. But for me, it is essential not to see my life as being in vain. I cannot give up being what I came here to be, because otherwise I'll become nothing. Because people accuse you of thinking you are too important, that your work will be greatly missed. Look, be careful, because that is an argument of resistance. It is about being missed by yourself. For you, it is a matter of life or death. He speaks. He speaks about it as if it were a hunt. He talks about the vulture, which flies in front of his house, searching for a mouse. It is a matter of survival. If the vulture does not catch that mouse, there will be no food for its chicks, and it won't be able to make it through the day. He says that he does his work, earns his day, and sleeps the sleep of the just. He completed his hunt that day, caught his prey, did his work. But he knows that when he wakes up, resistance will be waiting for him at breakfast. There is no final victory. Every day is a battle. It is like feeling like a poor wretch. This one is great. He says that he was a naval warrior. Indeed, it is in his biography. Do you know what an American Marine is? A Marine. That tough crowd. He says, look, everyone thinks that Marines are fearsome, capable of doing anything. But actually, they are not that great. But in truth, there was one thing they taught me that was tremendously useful, which is feeling like a poor wretch. They love being poor wretches. Their lunchbox is the coldest of all the armed forces. Their core is the one that suffers the most casualties. They are the ones who endure the most hardships, cold, and hunger. They are those who face the greatest adversities. They take pride in this. He says they claim that people from the other branches of the armed forces are the weak ones. They don't know what it is like to feel like a poor wretch. He says that the more misfortune they experience, the prouder they become. I'm a poor wretch. In other words, I'm resilient. I'm prepared for adversity. And he said that he internalized this because if you don't internalize it, you cannot accomplish anything. He says that artists and anyone who truly commits to their work are volunteers for hell, to endure isolation, envy, criticism, insecurity, and so on. It is a war. Take those countless movies out there that tell the story of someone who accomplished something significant in life. I'm talking to you about artists, but really, it applies to anything. There is a movie called The Treasure of Troy, which depicts the discoverer of the archaeological ruins of Troy, Heinrich Schliemann. They even tried to kill him. People mocked him, saying that since Troy was considered a legend, after he finished searching for Troy, he would go looking for Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother's house. He was the target of ridicule, and sometimes even physical aggression. Everyone who has tried to pursue their dreams has had to know what it feels like to be an underdog, and to have a certain pride in that. Because it is a battle. It is an internal battle that also provokes external resistance. It is not easy. It bothers many people. It provokes envy. It stirs up all kinds of hostility. If you don't have a certain pride in feeling like an underdog, as people say, you are weak. You won't make it. You won't be able to handle the battle. You will give up halfway through. All of us are already professionals, aren't we? In our work. For physical survival, we do everything. The boss is annoying. The boss picks on you. Sometimes the boss is neurotic, but we endure it all. We are there. We clock in and only leave when the bell rings, right? In other words, you achieve results in the real world, you master the technique, and you have a sense of humor about what you do. That is, you don't dramatize your mistakes too much. Sometimes I see people, because by now I have 26 years of my own journey, and over these years, many people have come and gone, have been my students, have entered and left, and sometimes it happens that I see this person many years later in their professional environment. Then you realize that there are people who enjoyed the course, who liked what we were teaching, but did not have enough perseverance to overcome resistance and keep coming for those 2 hours a week, even though the course was offering them growth. They couldn't overcome the resistance. But at their job, they are there for 20, 30 years and never miss a day. Why is that? Because the physical world does not allow you to let your guard down and stop feeding it. But the soul, yes, it does not have that same sensitivity to the call of your own soul. In other words, we are capable of perseverance and consistency when it comes to things that interest us. And yet, we have not awakened an interest in anything more subtle. We are professionals in our work. We are there, committed for the long term. Next year, we will still be working. If not in this job, then in another. We will be there every day, clocking in. The amateur is that person who does not show up every day, who does not stay the whole day. The risks are illusory and false, because he believes that if he does not fulfill his dream, nothing will happen. He does not receive any compensation. He will explain this detail. He identifies himself too much with what he does. If he makes a mistake, he feels as if he dies because he cannot handle criticism. He lacks a sense of humor and does not expose himself to judgment in the real world. You wrote a poem. Who do you show it to? To your best friend. Oh, how beautiful. You write so well. He is saying that just to please you, publish it in the newspaper and see what people have to say. Then you are in the real world. And the one who wants to fulfill their dreams wants to step into the real world, even if it means being ridiculed, but still in the real world, and not in a circle of friends who will only say what pleases you. Do you understand? So, the amateur lives in a fantasy world and does not take their dreams seriously. The story of King Kong, that little monkey, charming, isn't he? He had already written several scripts, those he had conceived in prayer. He couldn't sell any of them. He already had about 9 scripts, according to what he says. Then he got the opportunity to write the script for King Kong 2. It was the biggest failure on the face of the earth. He says, "Look, I invited my friends to go to the Van Prests for the movie premiere. There were only my friends in the theater. I had planned a little party afterwards, but they all disappeared out of embarrassment. They had never seen such a bad movie. It was a failure." The newspaper Critic wrote, "I hope that's not really your name. Steven Pressfield, so you don't embarrass your parents." Then he says a friend called him and asked, "So, are you going to give up?" "No, now I'm in the real world. I suffered a defeat, but in the real world, and no longer in a little fantasy world with just a handful of my friends. Now is when it truly begins. I experienced failure, but it is better to fail in the arena than to spend your whole life just backstage or standing by the door. Now, I'm in the arena. In other words, now it's for real." The professional understands that excessive love, like the passion of an amateur, will create such a strong emotional involvement that he won't be able to accomplish anything. The first criticism will bring him down, his anxiety will prevent him from focusing, and he will become dependent on external approval. That's why he needs to maintain a certain level of coolness, a certain distance. So, the professional says that you need to have the mindset of someone who brings their lunchbox to work, as if you were a salaried employee. I sit down every day and write. I don't. It doesn't matter if people will like it or not. I am fulfilling my duty to my soul. And it is as if I were an employee there, a professional. He says, I hold meetings, you know, like those companies that have meetings every Monday with their employees to discuss the week's agenda. I hold a meeting with myself and discuss the agenda for the week, and then I follow through. He got to the point, he is going to talk about it. Soon, about creating a company, he calls it You Incorporated. Where there is him as Plato and him as the employee. So that he can hold himself to the same punctuality and consistency every day. In other words, there needs to be a certain distance that allows him to focus on his work without dramatizing either victories or defeats, and not be defeated by these circumstances, which are always challenging. So, working just for money, as if it were to cool a fever, instills cold blood, inexorability, the mentality of just getting by. The person who fulfills their dream is like an infantry soldier, present every single day. Whether they succeed or not, it doesn't matter, I love my work. Resistance thrives on pride and presumption, vanity and affectation. The muse favors those who work with dedication and sobriety, without haste and without pause. I have a salary. I am here to earn my daily bread. My true salary is the fulfillment of my soul. Even if not a single penny comes in, I pretend that it does. I buy time slots. I have a responsibility. This is not a game. This is serious. An amateur thinks that if they don't do it, nothing will happen. That is a terrible mindset. They truly will accomplish nothing. A professional is patient. He says that resistance uses people's fantasies as its favorite trap. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to become a famous writer. Nothing will happen with your first book. With the second one, in fact, you might not even find anyone to publish it. He says that several of his books ended up in the trash without anyone ever reading them. Several? I'm joking. Screenplays, just for movies, 9. Nothing will happen, but you will have overcome resistance. It doesn't matter if what you have written will be published or read. What matters is that you have overcome resistance. You have opened up a space of responsibility, developed technique, and created the conditions so that, at a certain moment, inspiration can act through you. So, professionalism, seriousness, responsibility, everyone who dedicates themselves to a dream must do so as a professional, or else nothing will come of it. A dream is not a hobby, that is the attitude of an amateur. And an amateur is defeated by resistance in no time at all. The professional has the mindset of an ant patient, prepared for long journeys. They know that everything costs twice as much and takes twice as long as planned. They have no expectations. They work without haste and without pause, every single day. A professional seeks order, as I mentioned to you, so that the muses do not soil their garments. How beautiful that is. Soon he will delve into this more metaphysical aspect. He believes that there is an entire ceremony involved in creating a work. So, order is fundamental. Order fosters mental order. He shares that he lived in the bed of his Chevrolet pickup truck for many years, and it was such a mess. He had to remove a ton of dirty clothes just to find his typewriter buried underneath. He said, "It's no wonder I couldn't create anything worthwhile, because the muse does not manifest in a space like that." Physical order is necessary so that there can be mental order. A professional focuses on technique, masters the how, and leaves the what to the gods. Ritual. In other words, he seeks responsibility, order, and mastery of all the techniques he needs. And he knows that inspiration will come when he becomes worthy. But inspiration does not belong to him. It comes from above. If he fulfills the entire ritual, does everything that is his responsibility, it seems that there is something, he will speak about this soon, something greater that descends upon you and honors you with inspiration. If you fulfill the ritual, you put everything in its proper place. A professional does not accept excuses. If you give in today, you are twice as likely to give in tomorrow. In other words, today I want work because I'm with the flu. Tomorrow, your flu will get worse. Or you might come up with something even more serious. If you give in for one day, the likelihood that tomorrow it will become 2, 3, 10 days and that you want return increases. You have given space to resistance, and it will come at you with full force. He says it is like telemarketing. If you say hello, you are lost. The professional doesn't even answer the phone. The professional doesn't answer the phone. Lot. How beautiful. So that the muses do not soil their garments. He even cleans the doormat at the door, because he is waiting for the muses, so that they do not soil their garments. Then he sits down and works, following the entire ritual, the objects that are symbolic to him, and even a prayer, in fact, which is the invocation to the muses from Homer. Beautiful, truly beautiful. A professional is prepared, works in the real world, facing both adversity and opportunity. He knows that a perfect field exists only in heaven. He went to play golf in Scotland, the rascal, because the Scots are formidable in this sport. So, he says he was about to make a perfect shot, but then the wind blew and carried his ball to the other side. Then they say that Cade, who holds the clubs over there, looked at him with a smiling, teasing expression and said, "You just have to count on the wind." They say he got irritated, but the wind. I have to count on the wind, it's part of the game. In other words, you are in the real world, there is wind, there is everything. You have to take all circumstances into account and adjust for the wind, so that your ball reaches the hole. You know, an ideal world without wind, without the unevenness of the terrain? If you were playing golf in paradise, but here, there will always be these things. You count on that, and you prepare yourself more and more each time. Resistance is fertile and cunning, and it will have different weapons every day. The goal of a professional is not to achieve a success that will put my name in the newspaper tomorrow. The goal of a professional is to overcome myself every single day. Every day, to be victorious over resistance. I have won my day, and I sleep the sleep of the just. Because I did what was my responsibility today. The reward for the professional is the sleep of the just. I have earned my daily bread, I have fulfilled my mission. He does not expect glory, nor recognition, he assures himself. Honor what is yours to do, and rest in peace. A professional does not show off, does not flaunt, even though he has his own unique style. I find it very beautiful, that wonderful pianist, Brazilian, who is now one of the greatest in the world, Nelson Freire, fantastic. He says, in a documentary about his life, which, if you haven't watched, you don't know what you are missing. He is a very special person, and he says, "Look, when people start applauding me too much, I leave the stage. People say that this is arrogance on my part. No, I do not want to claim merits that are not mine. They belong to the music. Do you understand? But people tend to offer a lot of flattery, a lot of. I don't like it, so I leave the stage and go back to my dressing room. The merits are not mine, they belong to the music. It merely passes through me. But it is such profound humility, such genuine simplicity, that you know he truly feels this way. A pontiff, a bridge through which music flows, but the merit is not his. He says a professional is like this. He is a bridge, he is a channel. He knows that things are accomplished through him, but he does not own the beauty. He simply creates the conditions for beauty to manifest through him. Do you understand? So, it truly is a kind of ceremony. He strives to be worthy. The professional dedicates himself to mastering technique, learning from the past to have a toolkit ready when inspiration arrives. He often speaks about this kind of person. A professional does not hesitate to ask for help, knowing that any art is inexhaustible. He seeks to learn from anyone who has something to teach. He mentions countless times a person I would not even know existed if it weren't for him, named Tiger Woods. Have you ever heard of him? I think he is the greatest athlete in the field of golf in the world. Imagine how much I know about golf. But he says that this Tiger Woods is an impeccable professional. He says that he is the best who has ever existed in this category in the history of the sport. But he has a coach and accepts being taught by his coach. He does not consider himself to know everything and has the humility to always want to learn from those who have something to teach. He says that the one who is always eager to learn possesses this humility of always wanting to learn. Such a person will always be growing, and that is what makes a true professional. They do not see themselves as the sole owner of the truth. A professional distances themselves from being just an instrument. They understand that their physical, psychological, and mental being is a tool that God has lent them. They use it objectively, with detachment. They identify with their consciousness and their will. I'm the consciousness and the will that guides this instrument that has been lent to me. I came into this world to accomplish a work. I strive to keep this instrument in good working condition. I do not identify with its fluctuations. I do not identify with its moments of glory, nor with its moments of depression. It is there. It is a tool that I strive to keep in good condition. I'm my consciousness and my will. This is a tool that God has lent me so that I may come into the world and fulfill a purpose. It is like a glove on the hands of the divine. He lent it to me so that I could come into the world and accomplish a work. I do not identify much with its fluctuations. Therefore, it fluctuates very little. Because our physical and emotional body is like a child. Have you ever noticed? When you pay attention to it, it throws more tantrums. But if you ignore it, it gets up and goes to do something else. I do not identify with this body, so it does not throw fits, because I would not have time for that. You can see that for him, creation is a spiritual act, a mystical experience, a profound identity, a service, a feeling of surrender. It is truly remarkable. A professional does not take failure or success personally. Their awareness exists beyond the personality. He says that the Bhagavad Gita, which he will reference often later on, is a book that teaches us that we only have the right to serve and to love our work. Whether the results are good or bad is secondary. It depends on the soil. You plant the seed, and whether it bears fruit or not may depend on the ground, not on you. But every day, I planted my seed. A professional finds validation in being faithful to their work. They view criticism solely as an opportunity to see if there is something to learn from it. But there is no need to feel devastated just because the criticism was negative. He validates himself and returns unfailingly every day. He will return tomorrow. Whether he failed or succeeded today, he is relentless. A professional endures adversity and does not take humiliation personally. This story, he is very humble and shares the events of his life with great simplicity. He said that he was already over 40 years old, with a resume and a pile of movie scripts that no one had ever accepted. A record of failure as long as his arm, as he puts it. Then, one day, he went to speak with a producer. He managed to get an interview with the producer to present his scripts. He says the producer kept talking, looking at his work, all the while speaking on the phone, wearing headphones. The whole time, he was talking on the phone. Until a call came in, and he turned to him and said, "Look, this one is personal. Could you step out for a bit?" So he stepped out so the producer could take the call, and ended up standing at the office door for an hour. The man forgot about him. After a while, the man came out wearing a suit. "Oh, you are still here. Sorry, I forgot, but now I'm busy. I won't be able to see you anymore." He said, "These things hurt. I was no longer a young man. Imagine if I had taken it personally and let myself be devastated by it. I kept moving forward. Today, that producer must be deeply ashamed of having done that. I kept moving forward. In other words, he does not take humiliations personally. There is a passage that I find very interesting. Professor George Unhappiness, who is the founder of New Acropolis, often speaks about the fixation that human beings have on the negative. He says that, for example, when we see a glass half filled with water, we tend to look at it and say it is half empty, not half full. In other words, there is always a fixation on failures, on difficulties. Pressfield has his own way of expressing this, very much in his own style. He says that when it comes to a donut, we always look at the hole and not at the pastry. A professional looks at the pastry. There is pastry here, the hole I disregard. In other words, one stands firm, finds validation within, and does not allow oneself to be affected by circumstances. It is better to be in the arena, even trampled, than to be in the stands or out in the parking lot. Even if I am being trampled, I'm in the fight, I'm in the arena. At some point, the game will turn. A professional validates themselves. He once again shares the example of whom? Tiger Woods. Later, you can look him up on the internet, because I think most of you probably know as much about golf as I do. It is not a very popular sport in Brazil. He says that Tiger Woods was once preparing to take a shot in the final of a championship. And someone in the audience took a photo. The flash dazzled his eyes, right at the moment he was swinging to make the shot. He said that he stopped, startled, looked at the person with a piercing gaze, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then went on to make the perfect shot. Imagine if he had a habit of playing the victim. Imagine if he were emotionally unstable. The game would have been over for him. Let's get rid of this guy. Someone is plotting something. Who put this person here? They want to defeat me. It doesn't matter. I close my eyes, focus, and do what I have to do. It's the problem of the fool who did that. He said he made the perfect shot. He managed to channel all his anger and frustration into a single look at the guy. Just 1 second. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and he was himself again. Pop, the perfect shot. Any little voice of resistance would have ruined his game. Any loss of control. This man is an example of a true professional. A professional reinvents himself. That is also something very interesting. He talks about the actress Goldie Hawn. And he says that she mentioned there are 3 stages for a Hollywood actress. You are either the baby, the divine, or you are driving Miss Daisy. Do you know Miss Daisy? I don't think so, right? That movie about the elderly lady who had a driver taking her everywhere. And truly, I believe that in Hollywood it must not be easy for an actress to grow old, right? Because there will only be opportunities when they make driving Miss Daisy too, since there is almost no space at all for an older actress. He says, well, she says this with indignation, but a professional knows perfectly well that sometimes the muse may need him in other roles in life. His roles may need to be adapted, depending on his age. He was a great athlete. At a certain point, he can become a great instructor. He shouldn't expect to remain a great athlete forever. At 60 or 70 years old, does he know how to adapt? Does he not see himself as persecuted, nor believe that the laws of life are unjust? Have you noticed how many people, how many professionals, when they reach maturity, fall into depression? Because they are no longer invited, because they are no longer considered. A true professional understands this. He is always active, ready to take on different roles, according to what life is, what the muse expects from him, and what is possible. In other words, he reinvents himself. He sheds one garment and continues his journey as a reincarnated soul. A professional is recognized by other professionals. He gives the example of the gunfighters in John Wayne's movies. Everyone knew when someone else was a good shot. A professional recognizes when a person is serious, has a solid foundation, and takes responsibility for what they do. He talks about this idea of the company, saying it was a great insight he had and that he applies it. It doesn't have to be a legal entity. It can be something imaginary. But he says the best thing is to stop being just yourself and become you incorporated. Because then you have a boss, a part of you that is the boss, and another part of you that is the employee. And then, if the employee part of you gets lazy, you, the boss, hold them accountable for their schedule. If you achieve success and start to feel overly proud, you, the boss, step in and keep your ego in check. If you experience failure and feel like getting depressed, you, the boss, step in and put you back in your proper place. He says that when he used to go out to try to sell his scripts or seek sponsorship for his books, he felt like a poor, helpless soul. He couldn't bring himself to ask people to sponsor his work. But after he became Poor John Incorporated, the problem was solved. When it comes to professional or material matters, without emotional involvement, he goes there and negotiates without any issues. In other words, it distances you from emotional fluctuations and creates a truly professional relationship. There is the me who writes, and there is the me who is my own boss, who meets with myself every Monday, sets the agenda for the week, and holds me accountable for my schedule and productivity. This makes everything well controlled, serious, and consistent. A professional is someone who does not give up. Remember that the strength of resistance comes from our own fear. Strengthen your focus on work. Be determined and relentless. As certain as the rotation of the earth. This is a quote from John Wayne. Among other things, he enjoys westerns. Then he says that John Wayne was chasing an outlaw in the Wild West. The outlaw escaped once again. Sorry, the bandit escaped once again, and he said, but he'll catch him as surely as the earth rotates. He loved this phrase because that's how a professional is. I will do it as surely as the earth rotates, no matter what. I will continue inexorably. Sooner or later, I will catch this guy. Inexorably, I will do my work indefinitely. No one will stop me. This is the seriousness of a professional. There is no mystery in being a professional. It is a decision carried out by an act of will. We decide to see ourselves as professionals. In other words, it is an internal decision. It is about your own desire. I have already told you an old story, which is said to be historical, though no one can say for sure, about a master named Bodhidharma, an Indian who lived in China. One day, a disciple sought him out, a former war general who was tormented by life in the material world. To him, it all seemed so meaningless. The Indians called it samsara, the wheel of days and nights, that serpent that bites its own tail. The repetitive routine, with nothing spiritual, nothing profound. He felt trapped in this. So he went to seek out Bodhidharma and said, "Master, free me from samsara." Bodhidharma turned to him and asked, "Who put you in it?" He replied, "It was me, wasn't it?" With just that question, he was freed. He realized he was in samsara because he believed he was in samsara. It was a decision. I'm an amateur because I believe I'm an amateur. From the moment I see myself as a professional, I am. And I honor that from today onward. It is a decision that no one can make for you. Do you understand? It is a mental switch. No one decides that for you. And it is not at all impossible. Now he will move on to the third part of our book, which is the higher realm. It is the smallest and, in my opinion, the most beautiful part. He explains that, just as there are forces of resistance that pull you down, when you learn to deal with resistance, and you have merit, there are also higher forces that become your allies. He will begin to speak about this very beautiful side of himself, which is all about spirituality, all the trust he has that there is something more. Something that aligns itself with the person who is humble, perseverant, consistent, and serious. Therefore, professionalism is vital, because the most important thing about art is to work with seriousness and rhythm. Something mysterious happens to help us. Power gathers around us like a magnet attracting iron filings. Resistance comes from hell, and creation from heaven, which can be an ally, active and enthusiastic. You remember that he wrote a book called The Warrior Code, right? He will say that the code of the professional is like that of the warrior, service and the absence of selfishness. When a person works in this way, with seriousness, perseverance, consistency, a spirit of service, and the absence of selfishness, they invoke certain forces that inspire them, whispering things in their ear. And then comes quality, then comes content, something no human being is capable of creating alone. Otherwise, the work will be mediocre. We face dragons to free the princess, which is God's plan for us, the reason we are here. When we fight against those forces that enslave us, we invoke the inspiration that will give us what we need to communicate to the world. He is going to talk about this friend of his. Among the many things he did, at a certain point in his life, he went to live in a small town in the interior of California, because he had a friend who lived in this trailer. His name was Paul Wink. And he would say to him, "Look, I had already crossed the United States from coast to coast. 3 times, I had destroyed a marriage. I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't produce anything. And this friend of mine helped me a lot. He told me what I needed to do and shared something very special with me, which was a prayer he always used before starting his work. At the beginning of the Odyssey, Homer's hymn invoking the Muses. From then on, this became a ritual for me. When I begin my work, I recite this hymn invoking the Muses, and then I start my task." He taught me the importance of seriousness, perseverance, and consistency. I spent 26 months tapping away at my typewriter, writing a book that was never published. It took 10 years for my first book to be published. After that came Beggar Vance. But when I wrote the end, I felt victorious, because I had overcome resistance. Then I went to visit Paul Wink, all excited to tell him I finished my book. He said, "Great, start another one today." Without much euphoria, he just said, "All right, you finished, that's good, congratulations. Start another one today. And it doesn't matter if it will be published or not." It never was. It went to the trash. That book of his, it seems. Not even what he wrote afterward, but he overcame resistance, you see? He earned his progress with seriousness. For 26 months, inexorably, he sat every day at a typewriter, writing without interruption a book that was never published. But it was worth it because he became a printed study. Do you understand? He built himself as a professional. He says you can believe whatever you want, but he will share the inspiration he has. Because how does he feel about this question of the metaphysical? Throughout history, the forces of nature, the intelligent forces of nature, have always been personified by different civilizations, each with different names. The Muses were children of God, who was the power, like Mnemosyne, who was memory. They were beings who inspired all the arts. It was said in Greece that no one produced anything of quality without the participation of the Muses. And so, he took these Muses as the source of his inspiration. In other words, the most beautiful creations come from something beyond the human. As if you possessed the merit of humility, perseverance, and constancy, and thus became worthy of something coming to you. The medieval alchemists used to say that you sculpt the chalice, and the wine is poured by the gods, because wine is a divine exclusivity. In other words, the great essence that you will leave to the world. It is a bridge between heaven and earth that you have built through your humility, your perseverance, and your constancy. The merit of the bridge is yours, but the product is divine. Because otherwise, it is worthless. Then he includes a passage from Plato. From Plato, from the Phaedrus, look how beautiful this is. Plato really said this, that you can clearly distinguish a technically perfect work from an inspired one. A technically perfect work, well, it has a lot of refinement, a lot of effort, but it does not change anyone's life. I always talk to you about that Spanish composer. What's his name? Astor Piazzolla. On one occasion, he gave an excellent performance and people said to him, "You played very well." And he replied, "Many times I play very well. But only rarely do I actually make music. Do you understand? You must be clean and pure enough for the music to flow through you. And then you are doing something that truly changes people's lives. It elevates consciousness and brings something new into the world." As the Dhammapada says, more valuable than 1,000 meaningless words is a single word that brings comfort to those who hear it. You have spoken your word, it became a bridge. So, this passage by Fernando Pessoa is beautiful. Just look. The third type of possession in madness is that of the Muses. If a man comes to the door of poetry untouched by the madness of the Muses, believing that only technique will make him a good poet, he and his compositions will never reach perfection, but will be completely overshadowed by the performance of the inspired madman. In other words, what does someone who receives a higher inspiration do? Do you remember Amadeus Mozart and Salieri? Mozart did not make drafts of the things he wrote. It was at first Scytha would write, and it was ready. He didn't draft, he didn't make corrections. Salieri would go mad because he would work on a piece of music for years and it would never come close to Mozart's perfection. Inspiration, the inspired madman, there is something divine in his work. He is not simply a technician, nor is it an expression of human vanity. It is something much deeper. Don't you ever feel, for example, when a singer, who may not be technically perfect, sings with their soul and moves you more deeply than many acclaimed or scholarly performers, no matter their status? This is quite noticeable. We feel it touches our hearts because it comes from the heart. Then he shares this beautiful quote from William Blake, saying that William Blake was truly inspired. He says this, and I wholeheartedly believe in his words. Eternity is in love with the creations of time. He explains that all traditions believe there is a dimension beyond space and time, where beings exist who are able to witness the manifested world. And they delight when people from the manifested world, who exist within time, make space for them to enter this world through their actions. The humble, the dedicated, the persevering, these are the ones they use as bridges to bring perfect works into the world. And they rejoice when these individuals serve as vehicles for this purpose. They draw near to those who are earnest, responsible, and humble, and they whisper inspiration into their ears. Artists have always invoked the muses. There is a certain magic in setting aside our human arrogance and, with humility, seeking help from a source we cannot see, hear, or touch. It is said, look, the muse must have whispered the Fifth Symphony into many ears, but no one had the purity and virtue to truly listen as Beethoven did. But before it existed here, these works already existed somewhere, outside of time, in eternity. They enter into time through the artist, through the creator. Who becomes a pontiff when they possess the moral condition for it? And thus, the invocation of the muse. I will read it in its entirety, but just so you have an idea, it is very easy to find. This is the introduction to Homer's Odyssey. He will comment on some details of this introduction. We will see. He says, Homer asks the muses to keep alive for him the story of the hero. In other words, he does not ask for merit, he does not ask for success, he asks for memory. O muse, do not let me forget the story of Ulysses. That is all he asks. The greatest evil for humanity is forgetfulness. He will say, this song, keep alive for me the memory of this song. This song, which is the Odyssey, is in fact the meaning of human life, because we all live an Odyssey. We go through many obstacles, we overcome many Polyphemuses, we overcome many Circes, we conquer many challenges in order to reach and attain what is most brilliant within us, our Ithaca. So, when he says, keep this song alive, he means keep alive the memory of the human saga, of where humanity must arrive and what it will face along the way. And he speaks of the foolish sailors of Ulysses, the foolish ones who, because of their desire for flesh, destroyed the cattle of the most exalted sun. And there is a passage in the Odyssey where Ulysses' sailors land on an island and eat the cattle of the god Helios, who was the sun. A desecration. He will say, the worst thing that can happen is desecration. It is when a person seeks the gifts of the divine for fame, to satisfy their own appetites, when they desecrate their work out of vanity, selfishness, or material interests. Such people will never produce anything of true value. They will never reach Ithaca. All these men perished. Ulysses' sailors were all lost. He will say that this compels us to bring the myth to life in all its many meanings. In other words, we must not forget that this is symbolic, that it does not merely tell the story of a man named Ulysses, who lived in a Troy whose existence is still debated today as either mythical or historical. It tells the story of humanity. The journey of Ulysses is a symbol of the journey of humankind through life. To be able to overcome all adversities without desecrating one's sacred work. To be able, as Ulysses was, at a certain moment, to become no one in order to survive Polyphemus. To be able to strip away all one's vanities and superficialities, and reach the shore completely bare, with nothing but one's heart, protected by a veil, preserving only the heart. And thus, to come to find one's own essence, one's own Ithaca. In other words, there are many details. I will not speak here about the Odyssey, but one thing is certain, the Odyssey, like all these myths, is not about the life of a single man, but about the life of humanity. And so he offers this prayer of Homer each time he begins to write. It is his prayer of invocation to the Muses, and he gives thanks when he finishes. Every day. The magic of beginning. He uses this phrase from Goethe, which is beautiful. Boldness contains within itself genius, magic, and power. Begin now. In other words, break the inertia. Set yourself in motion, humbly, with the tools you have. And go. Acquiring better tools along the way. Balance is achieved through movement, just like a bicycle, which cannot stand upright when still. Begin now. The magic of beginning invokes power. A commitment, a true commitment to your work, creates a rupture in the membrane that separates us from eternity. In a certain way, these beings begin to reach you and inspire you. The magic of continuing, this is very interesting. He says that after finishing his work, he always goes for a walk. He turns everything off, shuts everything down, closes the computer, and goes for a walk to relax, but he always takes a notebook with him. He says that when he is walking, thinking about nothing, voices start to arise in his mind. That word you used on the page, such and such a substitution is more appropriate. That chapter, for example, you said something you had already repeated earlier, change it. The beginning of this chapter works better this way. He asks, where do these voices come from? Who are they? He goes on writing everything down, and he says, this chapter I'm writing now, I'm changing its entire beginning according to the suggestions that were whispered to me yesterday. In other words, it seems as if someone is whispering things to us. It feels as if they are intelligent beings who know more than we do. They are all good suggestions. Every artist knows this. Every person who creates something, when they reach their limit, it seems as if someone, some subtle force, comes and whispers something more, adds to it. Something extra. And that is where beauty comes in, where the artistic touch appears, where the refinement of the master is revealed. I go out for a walk every day with a little notebook, because so many things come to my mind. The moment I shut down the computer, I'm not thinking about anything. Where do these voices come from? Who are they? They are intelligent and organizing beings who join forces with us. That's why true artists are modest, because they know they are merely taking dictation. And they are envied by those who cannot connect. The true artists, who know what they are receiving, what is the note? In other words, he is not vain, he does not claim the merit for himself. The true artist is like this, just as Nelson Frere is. The other is arrogant, a mere technician. Look how beautiful this is. This is a phrase of his. The Kabbalists believe that above every blade of grass, there is an angel shouting, grow, grow. I will go even further. I believe that above all of humanity, there is a great angel shouting, evolve, evolve. How beautiful that is, isn't it? How inspiring. And then he goes on to share two of his dreams. He says, when you have a very sacred, very special dream, do not share it, because it is an intimacy between you and your muse. Unless sharing it can help someone else overcome their own resistance. And then he shares two sacred dreams that he has. So much so that, when he sits down to write, he says he puts on the cufflinks that belong to his father, and a few other things related to these dreams. Once, he worked at the port docks. This man has done everything in life, as I have already told you. He was a Marine, a truck driver, worked at the port docks. He has done it all. He worked at the port docks. And then, one day, he had a dream. That he was inside a great ship, an aircraft carrier, which was stuck on solid ground. I don't know how that happened, but it was a few meters away from the sea, stranded on land. Planes kept landing and taking off, but no one knew how to get that aircraft carrier out of there. He says he saw the crew running back and forth, searching for Largo. Who was Largo? Largo was an old sergeant, a seasoned sea dog, experienced and mature. Everyone knew that if anyone had a solution to that problem, it was Largo. He was that citizen, that experienced petty officer who, in truth, was the one who really knew things. He saw that everyone's hope rested on Largo. Suddenly, he sees an officer, the captain, approaching while he himself was leaning against the edge of the ship. Then the captain comes up to him, distressed and saddened, and says, "So, how we will get out of this, Largo?" That's when he realized that he was Largo. He was startled by this realization and woke up. He asked himself, who inspired me to have this dream? Who told me this? You have the experience to set your own ship sailing. Where do these kinds of dreams come from? Who is it that whispers this in your ear? On another occasion, when he was working on something else, I cannot even remember what now, he spoke of another dream, which was also beautiful. He said that he used to sleep in a warehouse with his fellow workers. He went through many hardships. A friend bought a little book at a newsstand in the city of New Orleans, a small book called How to Meditate. He said he would read it there, and from time to time, after finishing work, he would go outside and try to practice what he had learned. He sat down in a meditation posture. Suddenly, he clearly saw, as if he had awakened, an eagle coming and landing on his shoulder. Then it was as if he had become the eagle. His head became the eagle's head, and he had the eagle's wings. And he began to fly. He was terrified by this, thinking he was going to fall, filled with fear. Then he realized that the air is as solid as the ground, as the earth. Because a bird is never at risk, not at all, as long as it opens its wings. Because the air is firm, it is solid. And then he asked the eagle, "What do I need to learn from this?" And she said, "The things you consider subtle are just as real as those solid things you can touch. For example, your dreams. Do you understand? The air is firm, it is solid, even though it seems subtle, seems like nothing. It is just as real as those things you can touch." He said, "Look, someone was treating me as if I were a little child, wanting to teach me the ABCs of life." Where do these dreams come from? These dreams, which are very sacred, ideally, you should treat them as something deeply personal to you. Do not share them unless it is for the benefit of someone else. This level of experience is truly remarkable. Very profound, very beautiful. What he has, is that it? In Greece, they called it a kind of theophany, a vision of the sacred. And because of his good intentions and his perseverance in seeking out his dreams, they truly are very special dreams. And on his desk, he has a ribbon with the word Largo written on it. He keeps a memento. He regards these dreams as a sacred episode in his life. He speaks about Tom Lowley, this film that I have also never heard of in my life. I don't know if anyone knows it. William Jack, he was an actor who worked in this film, and it is said that later he became a psychologist and then a psychotherapist. When people were diagnosed with terminal illnesses, he would sit with them. Tom Lowley passed away recently. He said that he would sit with people and ask, "What is your dream?" Then one person would say they dreamed of working with children with cancer. Another had a dream of doing something else. Whatever it was, he would say, "Go and do it." And at that moment, faced with the imminence of death, the person would consider this the most important thing in the world and would go do it. He says that, many times, the family thought the person had gone crazy. It seemed like madness. Often, this person would drop everything and go pursue their dreams, and the cancer would begin to regress. Many times, these illnesses can be your bogus way of taking revenge for the dreams you never fulfilled, for the life you never lived. In several cases, the illness regressed. The person left everything behind and went to care for an orphanage, a nursing home, or something else. They went to do what they had always dreamed of, and the illness began to regress. And in that moment, these people see this as an absolute priority. Everything that used to be important loses its focus. He asks, do we really need to come close to death in order to shift our focus from one point to another? That's when he introduces this Jungian theory, also something very interesting, because it seems that Pressfield has a remarkable ability to recognize everything that is valuable, since Jung is truly extraordinary. He goes on to discuss Jung's definition of the ego and the self. He even draws a diagram, which we will show in a moment. He describes this ego as the small I, because both ego and self mean I. This small I, which is a core within our consciousness, is responsible for survival. So anything that dares to do things that are not useful for survival, it cuts off. It commands, and it is necessary, because it ensures that you will overcome adversity and survive. But it eliminates any initiative that does not serve its own interests. He says that resistance is an agent in the service of the ego, of the small I. There is a self, which is a greater field of consciousness, where you receive the influence of dreams, inspirations, and everything that is divine. It includes the ego, but it is much greater. When people feel they are on the verge, for example, of death, automatically, consciousness leaves the small I and moves to the self. They begin to find it important to visit that relative they haven't spoken to. After so many years, they want to ask for forgiveness, to reconcile. They find it important to do something for someone else. Automatically, consciousness shifts from mere survival to a more human sense of life. And we should be able to do this without needing to be on the verge of death. He says, resistance works for the ego, while angels work for the self. This divine force works so that we may align ourselves with the self. And when we do this, they begin to contribute, they start to support our projects and inspire us. To work, to rise, I work with you, but not if you are only focused on mere survival. And so, all work done in the name of the ego is mediocre. All work, when it is done in the name of the self, is divine. And there is divine inspiration. He creates this comparison, which I find very beautiful, to help us recognize the motivations of the ego and the motivations of the self. The ego believes that death is real. The self believes that death is an illusion. It is just an episode. The self has a sense of eternity. The ego believes that time and space are real. That you have to live one moment after another. The self believes that time and space are illusions. A reflection, a dream like the one he had, can propel you 10 years ahead or even more. Time is more a matter of consciousness than strictly a chronological issue. The ego believes that every individual is different and independent, separate from one another. The self believes that all beings are truly one. And therefore, fulfillment depends on doing something for the realization of the whole. The ego believes that the predominant drive in life is self-preservation. It is instinct. The self believes that the predominant drive in life is love. It is inclusion. It is the pursuit of wholeness. The ego believes that God does not exist. And the self believes that only God exists. Imagine all the worlds, both of them, within us. And one promotes human fulfillment, while the other, animal survival. That is why, in that film I find so beautiful, Braveheart, there is a moment when the hero says, all men die, not all truly live. Some only survive. Do you remember Wallace saying that? In other words, some only have ego. They die without ever knowing heaven. They die without ever knowing themselves, strangers to themselves. And, evidently, without any contact with anything more spiritual. Experiencing the self. He goes on to say, many times, when we are unhappy, we seek out experiences that lead us to self-destruction. Deep down, it is not ourselves that we will see destroyed. Deep down, it is this small ego that imprisons us. It is as if we want to break open the door of the cage. So, there is an impulse towards self-destruction, which, deep down, is not a desire to die, but a desire to free oneself from the ego. He even mentions the terms we use, like knocked down, devastated, and so on. We are trying to demolish the ego in order to reach the heavens. It is the imprisoned soul, wanting to break down the door and find itself before time runs out. The self is our deepest being. It is united with God, incapable of falsehood, always evolving, and speaks toward the future. The ego simply wants things to remain as they are. Therefore, it stands against all those who have managed to find themselves. Philosophers, innovators, true artists, the ego despises these prophets of the self. Because they can awaken in people a longing for freedom, and the ego generates resistance. That is where resistance comes from. It wants nothing to change. He is going to talk about fears, which is very interesting. Of course, resistance works with fear, and there are many fears. There is fear of dying, fear of living, fear of losing the people you love, fear of suffering, fear of not being recognized. But he says that the greatest fear, the godfather of them all, is the fear of success. Because the fear of success is the fear of leaping to another level and having to honor it. And leaving the tribe where you are accepted, ending up alone. And not being recognized by anyone, remaining in solitude. The fear of success is terrifying, as it throws you into the unknown. So, deep down, all fears are fears of success. Fear of truly becoming the human being you dream of being, and entering a dark world where you do not know what awaits you on the other side. I remember that when I was in Portugal, at that port of Belém, where the navigators set sail to discover the New World, it was from there that the caravel departed, the one that discovered us. There is a beautiful statue of several men pushing the navigator forward at the tip, his chest open, facing a world he did not know what it held. There might have been nothing. There could have been an ocean that led to an abyss, as most people used to say, facing the unknown with a dream. Just imagine how terrifying that is. It is the fear of confronting the unknown and rebuilding yourself on a level you do not understand. So, you end up preferring the mediocrity of what is familiar. This is the great fear, and resistance plays along with it. The fear of becoming what you have always dreamed of being. He speaks of the authentic self. Anyone who has several children knows that none of them are the same. Each one is born with their own nature, with their own dream. And it is as if each of us is an expression of a mission. We cannot simply arrive and do just anything. We have a message that we came to deliver to the world. And deep down, if we ask ourselves, we know what it is. You cannot just come here and do whatever you want, whatever is trendy, whatever makes money. In truth, you can do one thing. It seems that this life was destined for a message that you have to bring, which is the message that resides within your authentic self. We have a refined and individualized soul. A destiny, a specific mission to fulfill, which must be discovered and brought to light. And then he shares this very beautiful poem by an English poet. Our birth is nothing but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, the star of our life, once dwelled elsewhere and comes from afar, not completely forgotten and not entirely naked, but we come trailing clouds of glory from God, who is our home. Beautiful, isn't it? Truly beautiful. In other words, we came here with a specific mission. We are not here by chance. Then he offers this definition, which I find truly wonderful, my friends. Territory versus hierarchy, as we come to a close. Territory versus hierarchy. He explains that there are two ways for beings to position themselves in the world. Hierarchy is the most common. He refers to this, for example, among chickens as the pecking order, the order in which they peck. So, there is the most powerful rooster, who has the right to go first. Dogs have this too. The alpha male is the first to go to the food, while the others wait quietly, showing respect. It is a hierarchy where there is the most powerful, the top dog, the leader, then others who are more subordinate, and finally the one at the bottom of the hierarchy. Everything is defined by who is above and who is below. And your place within all of that. He said that this works well among most animals, and it also works in human communities. For example, in high school, he says it's like this. The girls who are the cheerleaders are at the top, others find their place. Then there's the group of chess players, the nerd who stands out, and others find their positions. The tough guy, who is the leader among the boys, and the rest arrange themselves accordingly. In high school, he says this hierarchical order is very clearly defined. In small towns, up to a certain size, it's the same. You define yourself by your role. The place you occupy in the hierarchy is known by everyone. You know it and accept it, and that becomes your role in the world. But he says that within a human community, when it starts to grow too large, it becomes impossible to maintain a hierarchical order. If you are living in New York, no one knows who you are anymore. You drive down the street in that fancy car to impress people, but no one even looks. There are countless fancy cars just like yours. You are nothing. You become nobody, at least from the perspective of a hierarchical order. This leaves a person feeling very unanchored. He says it is as if there is a kind of tribal memory. Within a small group, he knows the role he occupies. But from a certain point onward, this hierarchical orientation no longer works. He goes on to say that, from the artist's perspective, hierarchical definition is fatal. He points out that there is hierarchical definition in Hollywood, and there is hierarchical definition within sports. People only look outward. They don't want to do a job because they want to take. Leave a message for humanity, to add something positive. No. He wants to be within a scale where there will be authors better than him, more widely read, and authors worse than him, less read, to have prestige, to be invited on television from time to time. In other words, he defines his position by looking outward, looking at those above him, looking at those below him, never looking within himself, never truly knowing himself or understanding what he has to offer the world. Never. Always looking outward. So, he says that this type of author, the author, does not speak what his soul commands, he says what the public wants to hear. So, he is a mercenary. He says that the muse becomes furious with this kind of person, because he profanes the muse. He does not consult his soul to know what to do, he consults the market. He affirms himself based on the hierarchical order in which he finds himself. So, he says that this type will never receive inspiration from the muse, he profanes the muse. You will notice that today we do not consider this. Within Greek poetry, because poetry in Greece was considered sacred, they would say that when an artist used a coarse word in a poem, a vulgar word, they would say that this man does not have the muse. The muse does not enter a tainted territory. He has profaned the art. The muse will not enter there. Today, it is quite curious, especially when we talk about poetry, because it has become fashionable to use the coarsest things in the world within poetry. It becomes a play on words. And when we say that these are acts of profanation, no one understands, because nothing is sacred. Nothing is sacred. They had boundaries, they understood. Well, there are certain rules for invoking the muse. Today, there is nothing that is Socratic. Well, and the other orientation, besides the hierarchical one, is territorial orientation. He says that the artist necessarily must have a territorial orientation. The artist has a certain territory that he defines, and he invests his whole heart there. And that territory, which is your work, your craft, whatever it is that you do, it nourishes you. You invest all your love there, and whenever you need something, all you have to do is place yourself within your territory, and it gives you everything you need. He mentions that Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he feels down, goes to a gym. Even if the gym is empty and he is the only one there, that territory nourishes him. It lifts his spirits. Stevie Wonder, when he feels down, goes to a piano. And he doesn't do it because someone will listen. If the whole world were to end and only he and the piano remained, he would still go to the piano. That is the territory that nourishes him, that gives back to him. A territory is like a bank where you invest your energy, and it returns energy to you. He says, in front of my house, there is a hill where there is a coyote with only 3 legs. That coyote owns that territory. He's the one who rummages through all the trash cans in the area. He says, in his own territory, even a creature with 3 legs is stronger than any other. Because when another coyote tries to invade, he chases them away. Do you understand? A territory does not require anyone else to be there. It does not need anything. It simply needs you to be present in it and for you to have cultivated it. It returns all the energy, all the love, all the motivation that you have invested in it. And then he will even explain how you can tell whether you have a territorial orientation or a hierarchical orientation. A person with a territorial orientation looks inward and is nourished by all the love they have already dedicated to their work. That territory, once again, the reason, it provides energy. He will talk about the scribbler, who is the demagogue who does what the public likes. He will tell the story of the bookbagger Vance. He had already written a lot of movie scripts and hadn't sold any. He had experienced the failure of King Kong. That was a real failure. He practically had nothing. It was hard to believe in his career. Then he had the idea to take the Bhagavad Gita and turn it into a book script. So he went to talk to his agent, who, it seems, by that time, there was finally someone who had the courage to be his agent. Then the agent put his hand on his head and said, "My God, his first book didn't sell, and now it is another book about golf. This isn't going to lead anywhere." He said, "Well, but the muse had already taken hold of me. I had no way to negotiate. It had to be, and it had to be that way, a novel about golf." It was a novel, and he was absolutely faithful to that inspiration. It became the most successful novel of his entire life. It was turned into a movie. And he said, "I attribute this to my faithfulness to my territory." It was almost suicidal, a novel about golf by an unknown author. But I remained true to my territorial guidance and to the inspiration of my muse. And it achieved the success that it did. It was a turning point in my career. It was his first successful work that I promoted. And it talks about the three-legged coyote and about that issue I mentioned to you regarding territory. It gives back to us the love we dedicate to it. It depends on each person. It can only be claimed through work. It is fair it returns to us what we invest in it. So, my whole life is here. I come back here, and this nourishes me again. Speaking modestly within our situation, those of us who do volunteer work at New Acropolis, many of you have been with us for many years and know this: you go through a difficult day, because we all work. Work at New Acropolis is voluntary. We go through tough days, facing many challenges, just like everyone else. And when I go to a school to teach a class, I am certain that if I went home instead, I would sleep poorly and be in a bad mood. But you walk into the school, give a class, and you leave uplifted, not even remembering what happened during the day. What was I in pain from? Again? What was that health problem I had? I don't remember anymore. I am absolutely certain that nowhere else in the world could make me feel this good. If I had gone home and gone to sleep, I might have stayed with that pain all night long, and I would have woken up in a bad mood. It is very interesting because this idea of work, the philosophy, the work we do is deeply rooted in our environment. Being here with you all is, without a doubt, what heals anything I might have. It is truly fascinating. Well, now he is going to make that characterization I mentioned to you earlier. The act of creation, he says, is like a mother raising a child. She expects nothing in return, not even that the child will be happy, nor does she hope for success or recognition because of the child. She feels that something strange and new comes into the world through her. Is this true? I have children, and I have witnessed this. When the child is placed in your arms, a miracle. You can hardly believe that it was you who brought that human being into existence. He came into the world through you. Our work is like this as well. It comes into the world through us, and all we do is protect it, nothing more. To work hierarchically, focused outward, seeking merit or recognition, is to insult the muse and make her furious. Then, indeed, one might ask, how do I know what my true direction is? If I have problems, should I seek the opinion of friends, or should I return to my own inner territory? He said, look, imagine if you were Schwarzenegger, and instead of going to the gym, you picked up the phone and called 6 friends to ask if they liked you. He would never do that. That is a hierarchical orientation. Territorial orientation. I go to my own territory. I go to the place where I have invested the best of myself. If I were the last person in the world, would I still continue to develop this activity? In other words, do we draw sustenance from the activity itself or from the impression it makes on others? That is how you determine whether you are oriented outward or inward. Do you have a territory? He tells the story of Leonidas. You know, he has a beautiful book about the 300 Spartans, Gates of Fire, the war of Sparta against the Persians. He says that the great general Leonidas, king of Sparta, used to say that the supreme virtue of the human being is contempt for death. And he goes on to say that, in our case, as we pursue our dreams, the supreme virtue is contempt for both failure and success. It does not matter. Very few people who accomplished great works were recognized by their contemporaries. Are you aware of that? Few were the geniuses who were recognized by their contemporaries. I am not saying that we are geniuses, I insist, but simply that we strive to be human. The logic is the same. If we wait for everyone to recognize us, in a historical moment marked by so much superficiality, being human is almost subversive. Waiting for recognition from others is a waste of time. We must have contempt for both failure and success. And this ability to self-validate, to sleep the sleep of the just, to fulfill our duty. With my duty, I performed my sacred task. I did what was required of me as a human being. I left a trace of humanity in the world, at least for today. And then he speaks about the fruits of our labor. As we come to a close, he returns, Bhagavad Gita always returns. He talks about this dialogue in the Bhagavad Gita between Arjuna, a prince, and Krishna, who represents the divine. It is a conversation between the two in the midst of the battlefield. And Krishna tells Arjuna that the greatest thing in the world is to work solely out of duty. And when the fruits of your labor come, you dedicate them to the divine. Because the inspiration did not come from yourself, if the fruits come, you return them to the same source from which the work originated. In other words, the result of work is an offering. And the work itself is the only nourishment I need. The satisfaction comes from knowing that I have served, and all the results, an offering. He says, well, this is an excellent way for a person to be free from ambition and anxiety. There is a passage in Buddhist doctrine, the Noble Eightfold Path, where Buddha speaks about the tools for a person to free themselves from suffering, in which he describes a series of things that must be done with righteousness. Right livelihood, right concentration, right action, right effort, a multitude of things. In short, what is he trying to say? For a person to escape suffering, they should stop seeking the results of their actions and instead seek the righteousness with which they do things, finding satisfaction only in that. Today I was recognized, it does not matter. Today people liked what I did, it does not matter, but I acted with integrity. I sleep the sleep of the just, I made the most of my day. You understand? The way I acted was humane, it was dignified. And am at peace. Rewarded. I am already a well-compensated professional. I have been rewarded by the footprints I have left in the world, by the trail I have made that was enough. And the fruits, like an offering. They are not mine, just as Nelson Frary does when he steps back into the backstage. The fruits are not mine. They are an offering. He says, this is the best way to escape the ambition for the fruits and to be guided by desire. To work for the sake of the work itself, and not for wealth, recognition, or applause, and even more, to offer it as a gift to God. If the work comes from the heavens, why not return it to them? A sublime form of spiritual devotion. To be servants of the mystery. To give life to what does not yet exist, but will exist through us. For what will come into the world thanks to us, to give life to this, and to offer it as a merit to the divine, because it was from there, after all, that it came. How beautiful is this phrase from the Bhagavad Gita, which he quotes in a versified, poetic way. Grant me the act, purified of expectation and selfishness. Fix your attention on the soul, act, and accomplish for me. This is Krishna, in the figure of God himself, speaking to Arjuna. Grant me the act, purified of expectation and selfishness. Fix your attention on the soul, act, and accomplish for me. Do it for me, in my name, and offer me the fruits. This is Krishna, that is, the divine itself, speaking to humanity. Truly beautiful, isn't it? Very beautiful. To give in to resistance will not only harm yourself, but also your children, me, and the planet. To yielding shame to those who created you with the sole purpose of advancing the human race. Even a millimeter forward on its long journey back to God. Human and creative work is a gift to the world and to all who inhabit it. Give us what you possess. And so it concludes. As I mentioned to you, it is a gathering of so many elements, from so many times, from so many eras. This is a demonstration of philosophy adapted to our time, to the language of today. Very well done. This is basically everything we discuss within the philosophy course. Well, not everything. Everything we discuss, at least at a certain stage. An introduction, but there is nothing within this work that is not philosophical. It is an adaptation, in contemporary language, of many teachings of philosophy. Once again, I invite you to come and experience the course, because we are not meant to learn this alone. All these things he mentions, I know them because they were taught to me with great patience and perseverance. And today, when I look at these things, I say, how fantastic. What he is saying makes perfect sense. It's not uncommon for someone to pick up a book like this one by Pressfield and say, he's crazy. As I mentioned to you, in Brazil it hasn't been reissued. Why is that? Lack of an audience. In the United States, it received a lot of criticism. They said he was writing self-help. So, through philosophy, are we able to understand a work like this? Pressfield, being such an extraordinary person, a genius, I am nothing of a genius, but am still able to understand what they are talking about. Because we have inherited this entire tradition, organized through a method of study, which is philosophy. And that is what we offer to you. The work of philosophy is precisely this, to teach us how to live, by gathering together all that is best from history. This resistance is an old acquaintance of ours, because there is not a single serious philosopher in history who does not speak about it. With different names, everyone talks about tea. It seems to be one of the great questions of the human condition.